to this particular painting. And what we're going to spend most of our session today is strictly detailing the barn, finishing out the wheel, and just the immediate area around the barn. And the next week we'll put the rest of the details in around the painting and the water and so forth, and kind of maybe in the next session or two we'll have this thing wrapped up so we can start a new painting. All right. But first of all, we have to do some mixing here, and it has to be mixed very precisely and using a special brush. So let's go down to the palette, and let's just take some plain white. In this particular session, we're going to use white in its pure form with a little drip of water to get it nice and creamy, and I mean very, very fluid. Now, I'm not talking, like where it drips, but it's a very, very fluid mixture. It's kind of like very soft just before butter melts. You know how butter gets just before you can drip it. Okay, see, it's very loose and fluid. Then you take your script brush, the liner brush. Now remember, folks, for those of you that have joined us for the first time, we're working with the new water mixable oils. You don't have to use any turpentines, thinners, or cleaners. Just pure water to thin, to mix, and to clean with. And this is the most incredible invention that's ever been made in the world of art. And so now we're going to take our script brush and roll it around in the mixture. And let's take your steady rest, and we'll start just anywhere there are some of these details, and you just begin the process now of putting all the highlights around your barn. Now this in itself just creates so much impact. Okay, just be very careful, but if you use your steady rest system properly, this is an outstanding opportunity for you to really make this barn look complete. Now every time you put a swish, it's a good idea if you're working with the wet on wet technique, which this is. Now, some of you that are waiting from week to week, of course, most of you are, because, you're seeing the program today and next week another program. But I'm painting these in succession, so my paint's still wet. And if yours is still wet, say you're just now reaching this point, and you will wipe your brush out so that the red doesn't come up underneath it too much. Otherwise, it'll be real clean and sharp. You don't have to worry about it too much. All right, so you get your outer ridge. See, I just wipe my brush. You may even want to rinse it out once in a while. It's a good idea to keep a paper towel handy. All right, now we come around here and we outline the doors and windows. Wipe, reload. This is great. Okay. There we go. See, it doesn't take much. See how sharp that makes that look? Really gives this painting a lot of character. Okay, let's keep rolling here. We have a lot of ground to cover here, or a lot of barn to cover, however you want to say it. Now, this is also a good way to clean up and square up and give your building a little more snap. Really is fun. Okay, just follow along for just a few minutes. It's one of the rare times you're going to hear me fairly silent. But some things you just have to do sort of spend some time on, and we just don't have a whole lot to talk about at this point. So let's just get your highlights on. Now also, because this is the light side of the barn, you may want to lighten the doors and windows. We talked about in the first session that because this is the light side of the barn, unless these doors are open and there's no window coverings on them of any kind, they probably are going to be lighter. So after we get this part in here, the outline, then we might want to come back and change the color or the value. You can see here these windows. Now see, these look fairly dark, but you see these have a little lighter color. The door is white, and I'm not sure if I like a white door. We may make it sort of a gray door. But anyway, what we're going to do now is come back in and add just a little bit of interest to the windows, and we'll switch to our number 4 sable brush, and just take a little plain white now with whatever mud that's on your brush, and just go ahead and blend into the door like this. And all you're going to do is sort of lighten it. We're not really interested in making it a big fancy change here. Just sort of lighten it a little bit, maybe like sort of a wooden door or something like that. Perhaps even you would like to come in like this and suggest maybe the fact that there might be some windows in there or window panes. Take the end of your brush and scratch in the panes right like that. That's another fun thing you can do. You can utilize almost any part of your brush that works for you when you start doing certain things like details and so forth. This goes here, here, and just sort of, you're not really trying to make them look like anything, you're just trying to change the color, okay, just a little bit. Now, let's go back to putting the edges on. The trim work around the edge of the barn. I know about this because I just finished building one of these little guys, a smaller version, of course, but I'll tell you what, it was a lot of fun. All right. Got to highlight there. And highlight there. And all of a sudden, this thing's starting to look just like the photograph. Now, when you get to the dark side, you say, well, now how do I make that work? Because it's going to be in shadow. Well, what you do is you take your color, you add, just anything to tone it down. It could be even a little touch of purple and blue. But see, you just get a much sort of a grayer shade of this. And you go right down the side. Like that. And up here under the shadow here, you go ahead on the front part and put a little touch like that. Then you come over here, do this part. I say it's not important that it pops out because it is in the shadow. And there's another section here where it turns the corner. And then you come on this side. So you can see little by little how all of a sudden it begins to shape up. Really funny how a few strokes can really make the difference. Now over here we also have a highlight. Goes across like that. Now don't be afraid or even hesitate to hit that a second or third time if necessary. It's just not a big deal if you have to, because sometimes the color doesn't work as bright as you want and so forth. Now there's a little spot over here. Okay, where we need to get up underneath that. We'll be having some more trees and things too before long. Now let's go over here to the roof line of the building. Here. A nice little trim around the edge there. Now, I know this is fairly repetitive, folks, and I'd like to, like everyone else, I get a little impatient, want to move on and get this thing done. But one of the things that I've enjoyed most about what I do, and that is taking the time to do it properly and instruct it properly, then you don't get lost in the shuffle, okay? So be real patient as we go through this, and you'll find it a lot more enjoyable, and you'll be able to, it'll be easier for you. Okay? Now, very quickly, you can do your windows. Sometimes I'll just go in and do all the vertical strokes and then come back with all the horizontal strokes. Just everyone has their own system for doing these type of things. And if you want to put some little window panes in there, that would be okay too. That's no problem whatsoever. Okay, you see how that's starting to work? These are just a little bit less brighter because they're not in the sun, so that works out real well. And I think I will put the window panes in a couple of them. Just for fun. And you can do them kind of quickly. Remember, we talked about creating the illusion of depth and detail. That's all we're doing when we're doing this kind of thing. We're not really trying to make a photographic, duplicate a photograph. We're just trying to represent that object by painting it with some artistic feelings and emotions. Okay. Now, also notice in the barn here, these wood that you see that this is made out of is on a horizontal format. So those are wood that is put on in a horizontal fashion like siding. And the way you're going to suggest that is very simple. Now, some of you may have to make some adjustments here in order for it to work for you. But what I do is, first of all, let's mix our color. Just go down here and just take plain purple, the dioxazine purple, with a little bit of burnt umber, and get a real nice, dark, deep, rich color. See, just like this. All right, now you're not going to make every single line. You're just going to suggest the lines, just like we did on the roof of the building. But you're going to turn your canvas, if it's easier for you, and it is for some people. You can turn it sideways, like this, if you'd like. I don't get in trouble here. Of course, if it were acrylic, you could just lay your hand right on there. But what I'm going to do is put me just like this, so you can run your hand right down like this. Let's start up here. All right? Now, don't get carried away with making every single line. Just a few to get started. And that sort of suggests the vertical or the horizontal structure of the wood siding. Now, of course, it looks vertical here because it's this way, but when you're done, it won't look like that. Just put a few quick lines. I've even known artists that would go in and they'd take a pencil or any object that you could create lines with. It doesn't really matter. Okay, just go like that. And all this does is create a suggestion. Now, I'm going to recommend that you perhaps be a little more careful, because I'm always going to be in a hurry on the show. But you can take a little more time to be a little more accurate. But this is a technique that I've used many, many times, and it has helped a lot of people. So you do the same thing, even on the dark parts. So sometimes it's a long stroke, sometimes just a little short one or two. And over here, same way. And then you have got most of your, looks just like the wooden siding. Also, while you have it turned this way, there's something else we'll do here in just a second. That'll be good. Come up here to this section. See how quick I'm putting these on? Put a couple more thinner ones there. Maybe make it a little darker right there. That kind of really gets the mood of this. You can also come back up to your roof now, if you wanted to, and I do, and you might want to do the same thing, and just put a few quick strokes that are a little bit more, that show up a little bit better. And mine's not showing up. There we go. Just a few quick lines in there. I think these are important little strokes. Doesn't take long. Now let's turn it over and see what we have. See how neat that looks? Okay, now you take your thing here and you take a look at it. Of course, we've made ours a little brighter, a little more cheerful, a little more colorful, but all you see are suggestions of the lines coming across here, just like we have in the barn here, and it really, really is sharp. Now, after you've done a little bit of that, you can come back here and there, and I'm going to show you another little trick that's fun. If you'll switch to like a little round sable brush, this is a number 4 round sable. If you want to just take some, say some white with a little touch of orange, you can come back in, or even a little yellow, it doesn't really matter, and you can start streaking other colors in the wood. You don't have to just keep it pure red like we've got there, but you might want to come through and accent this like this, just by throwing in an occasional board like this. Now you see what that does, it adds a little bit of sparkle, a little more sunlight, a little more life to the painting, and you can even do the same thing on the dark side, as long as you're very careful. You don't want to get too much light over here, but if you'll notice what it does, it three-dimensionalizes the boards just a little bit more and adds that little bit more character. So don't ever hesitate, whenever you're doing wood especially. Now, this particular building is not real intense in terms of close-up wood. We've done some in the past where the wood was right up close, and there's a lot of technique for wood that's really exciting. But when you're just doing sort of a generic building, sort of off in the distance, just simple little strokes will give that illusion of a lot of detail, okay? Now, once you've kind of played with that a little bit, and you've kind of got that where you want it, the very next thing we're going to do here, and I think this is an important step here, remember we've talked so many times about composition, color composition, how to use the complementary color scheme and the value system to make your painting really do what it's supposed to do. Well, if you'll notice now, we have two very good complementary colors in this painting. We have the strong red barn, we have the aqua water, and I think it's time to go ahead and put a couple of cedar trees. Now, we talked about that early on, about maybe adding a couple of cedar trees, maybe a pine tree or two, and I think what I'm going to do is put a small cedar tree here, maybe one there, maybe one over here, and that will kind of help frame in the building so that it really stands out with those green trees on each side. Let's try it and see what happens. Let's take our sap green here now and add a little burnt sienna to it to warm it up slightly. Just mix that together. That's pretty much all you need to do. Take your number 4 bristle brush, rinse it out now, and let's do these cedar trees. Now, they're really fun to paint. All you do is just take a blob of paint like this, sort of at the angle that you want it, okay? Now, cedar trees, their branches go out and up, not out and down like so many pine trees. And the way you do a cedar tree, you just kind of swish like this, using sort of what we call the chisel corner of the brush, or the edge of the brush. Get it right next to the barn edge so that the barn will stand out. Right down to the edge here. Now, you see already what that does? It makes the barn stand out, or the building. That's great. Go up a little bit taller with it. Now, you got to put the paint on fairly thick in order for this to work properly. Maybe a little short one right there. I'm just going to sort of taper the color off like that. Now let's do the same thing over here on the other side. We might make this one just a little bit taller, just as a practical matter. See how neat that green makes the red look? Because they complement each other, and that's the way they are on the color wheel. It adds that real great three-dimensional effect to this whole thing. And then with the trees in the background and the light-colored sky, this just seems to be the right thing to do. It's amazing how in painting, sometimes that's what you look for. Sometimes it's not always a thing that you've planned. Sometimes it's not something that you've sat down and figured out because you read all the books and you know how to do it. But sometimes it feels right. And that's what painting is all about, folks, is what feels right. If it feels good to you and it looks good to you, you're the painter. Even if it was wrong, it's still okay if you like it. You know, you got to think about the great modern artists and the like Picasso and some of the great painters. They all painted things in a very distorted, sometimes very confusing way, but it was okay. The art world accepted it. Not A lot of us didn't understand it. I still don't understand some of the things these people did, but I have learned to respect all the forms of art just because art is individual. And if you're happy and you like it and it works for you, it's all that matters. Okay, let's go over here and put another one just to sort of taper this on. I love these little trees in here. I think this is just what we were looking for. Just the ticket. Isn't that exciting now how that starts to set this thing off? Kind of has a, I don't know, refreshing look, doesn't it? All right, now then, while we have the barn here, let's go ahead and kind of get a little reflection in the water. And if you just take the same brush, using even the color that's on there, add a little bit of the dark red, the deep red, which is the Grumbacher red, and with the green that's on your brush, I'll go ahead and show you this again. You can see the reflection in the water here, okay? Now all you're going to do is just sort of gently wiggle your brush like this in amongst the movement of the water. You're not going to try to duplicate its form. You just want to suggest the barn in the water. Then you come over here on this side. You want to add a little white to the color. Make it just a little bit lighter. You can do that. And that's really all that's necessary to give the water a little bit of flavor, okay? Now, after you've done that, it's time to go ahead and put the color in it so that we'll have everything finally painted. Then we can start finishing it up, okay? So on the wheel itself now, I want you to take your little round sable brush. This is the number 4 sable. Let's take a little bit of white and a little bit of orange. And then you can use your steady rest here. And it's just basically all you're doing is filling in the spaces that are left here. Just simply locking in these little horizontal lines all the way down to the edge of the water. That just all this does is kind of give this a little bit more of a finished effect. Again, we're creating the illusion of detail, adding the feeling and the emotion to the painting that we've talked about. I've noticed that many of us, as we paint, especially when you're a beginner, you want to make everything look like a photograph, and in the process of trying to do that, you always overwork your painting, and then whenever you want someone to critique it, and I've critiqued so many paintings, and the first comment is simply this: you really spent too much time in a certain area. Your painting will always look overworked if it's not fresh and spontaneous. So you want to move around the thing. Don't spend a lot of time in one area with a whole lot of little detail. You see, I saved this for the last, and I'm going to very quickly block in the basic forms of it. I'm not trying to get any major details here that will detract from the rest of the painting. Basically, I'm just covering up the canvas so that it won't be an eyesore. Really a simple procedure. Okay, and then we're going to put a little rim around the edge of it here. I'm just going to go around the edge like this and just sort of outline it, so to speak. I want to say the word outline very carefully because a lot of us do have a tendency to think we have to outline everything. And you don't really have to when you do this. But you see how nice that fits in there? We haven't really done anything, okay? We've just sort of put in a few little smudges and strokes, and now it looks like a wheel. Okay. Now, after you kind of block the wheel in, now we're going to do some of the fun things that I really enjoy most about finishing a painting. Now, there's a lot of things I like about the beginning of a painting, but what I like most about finishing a painting is, like, for instance, this little stone wall right here. If you'll take your number 6 or your number 4 bristle brush, I'm going to give you a little homework assignment here because we're running out of time as usual. You can see we've already underpainted and blocked in these things. Now it's time to come back with some darker colors. For instance, like a little bit of a burnt umber, a touch of burnt sienna, a little purple or blue, a mixture of colors. And all I want you to do is just come in here and put little strokes like this that are sort of broken. Now, you've seen me do this like when we did a whole series of Southwestern pieces. You saw me do a lot of stone walls and things like that on some of the admissions and everything. It's very similar to that. You just come in here and you put little short, choppy, broken strokes. Of course, you want to come in now and you sort of want to straighten the wall up, if you will, kind of give it just a little bit more character, but you don't want to get too carried away. And then we'll go like this, right on across. You see how that's working? Okay. Kind of square it up, clean up the canvas. And especially right here, for instance, maybe make these a little darker. These could be cut stones. They could be stones they just found around in the area. Of course, there are endless numbers of stones up in this part of the country. They use a lot of it for building, landscaping, and so forth. Okay. So you just sort of ad-lib and suggest. That's all you have to do, okay? So I want you to have a little fun this week, and then next week we'll finish the thing up, and then I got a surprise for you in the next few sessions. Well, as usual, we're out of time. God bless you. Stay inspired. Keep painting. And we'll see you again real soon on another inspiration. You're excited about that, and so am I, because it's always fun to finish and start a new one. All right, so what we're going to do here today is put some of the trees, finish the stone walls, and just do some of the things now that, you can kind of adjust yourself if you want to later on. But let's decide where we're going to put our trees. Now remember, early on, we talked about some of the trees that are in this particular painting. Now we added a couple of the cedars, which you can see hanging out here, by the way. But this big tree right here, in my opinion, sort of obliterates the beauty of this old mill. So what I've decided to do is move a couple of trees over here that we can reflect it to the water, put a couple right here beside the building, kind of on the water's edge, maybe one or two more over there, and there's a fence back here that probably goes on. This, by the way, is the road bed that goes on the front of the building. And then the water, of course, goes underneath it as it flows through this little section right there. So let's go ahead and start with our two big trees on the right-hand side of the painting, and watch how just those two trees alone really add some really strong finishing character to the painting. Now take your number 4 bristle brush. Let's go down here to the palette. Take burnt umber with a little purple. And let's just block in the shape of the tree right here. Now watch this carefully. Take your brush back like this and just don't be afraid. Now remember, folks, I've been working on this painting simultaneously for the last several hours. I have not gone from week to week like you have. It's just that the shows have to be aired that way in order to get them all in there. So your painting's probably dry. And if that's the case, then when you put your color on, it's going to be a little darker. So if that is what's happening to you, add a little more white to the paint and you'll be fine. Right now I'm using pure color, the burnt umber and the purple, and because my background's a little wet, you see, then it makes it not show up as much. So I have to go over it a couple times. So you do have an advantage by letting it dry. All right, now if you get the basic body structure of the tree in there, let's go ahead and put a little bit of the reflection in the water using the umber and a little purple. Okay, like this. See, I'm wheeling my brush, kind of following the angle and the shape of the tree there. There you go. See, just that in itself adds so much character and reflective quality to the water. Then switch to your number 4 Sable Script brush. This is the brush that we're going to use for adding the tree limbs. And come down here and take the umber, just pure umber with a little purple. Get a nice, thin, inky mixture. Now, we've gone over this several times in the last few weeks. And what I want you to do now is get a nice, fluid mixture, and let's put in a few tree limbs. Okay, starting right here. Again, holding your brush like this from the back of it. Now, this is going to be great. Now, once again, I've had many people say, well, every time I try to do that, I don't go as far as you do. Well, it's generally because you don't load the brush properly. Remember, you have to saturate the bristles down here, roll it around until the entire brush is filled with paint. Then come out like this. Always start from the inside and go out, from the bottom and go up. Never start from the top and go down, because you're always getting trouble. Now at this point, see, I can go in here and I can begin to proportion the tree. I may even have a little broken stump right there coming off or whatever. There may be a sapling or two at the base. Excuse me, I'm just getting over some kind of a cold here, and I'm still struggling with it a little bit. Okay, let's come up here. See how beautiful these limbs just fall right into place, and they really balance out the painting nicely. Now, because you are your own boss and you have the right to use your artistic license any way you want to, it doesn't really make a whole lot of difference where you go with these limbs as long as they fit the character of the painting. Now, if they start getting out of hand and overpower the painting, then you have a little problem. Now, see here I'm putting in some saplings sort of at the base. I love the way that looks because that sets the trees down, brings them forward, and pushes everything back, and everything now is in its proper perspective. Now, if you want to, you can put a few of these little limbs kind of, wiggle them a little bit in the water just to kind of suggest that they're in there too. But you don't have to get too carried away with those. Now, let's come in like this. A couple more lower limbs. Now, you may want to take a little more time to really adjust your limbs and get them in the right spot. Now, I will say this, don't be afraid to come way on out here. If your tree has to finish by going out further, hey, by all means, move it right on out. It's no big deal. Okay, let's just keep building this. Now we're going to come over here on the right-hand side of this tree here. And I want to get a couple limbs that go right on off the canvas. Okay, now we're doing real good. Limbs coming down, it's okay if they come kind of in front of the barn. It also helps to set the barn back a little bit and add a little bit more character to your tree. Now on the left side of the barn over here, right down here, sort of on this little island that sticks out here, we're going to have a smaller tree, but it's a little closer than the ones in the background. Now remember, this painting has, or this photograph, if you look here, has lots of trees all the way around it. That's what gives it its character. It's amazing how just these trees in this segment of the show will change the entire format of the painting. It just completes it. Okay, now I'm just going to spend a little time here getting all the trees in here. Don't be afraid of this. Just do it. Especially if you're working with acrylic, because all you got to do if you make a bad tree is take a little water and a paper towel and wipe it right off. And if your background is dry and as an oil painter, you can do the same thing. If it's wet like mine, the wet on wet technique that I'm using right here, it's a little bit risky to do that. So I'm just kind of building up some little weeds and brush, maybe a little shading right there. And then I'm going to come back, because this is part of a little wall right here too, taking my number 6 or number 4 bristle brush, and I'm going to go ahead and just sort of build just some little smudges, suggesting the fact there might be some rocks or stones along this edge too. You see, it's important that everything sort of channels right into this section of the painting. The water, the wall, the tree limbs lead in there. Everything just sort of focuses there. Now, as far as the water goes back in here, you can take a little umber and you can darken this reflection just a little bit, which probably wouldn't be a bad idea. Just kind of put a little bit more darkness into it to kind of make it fit into the the shading of the painting a little bit more. So I can take a little umber and just kind of put right in on top of this and kind of form a little line right there where the edge of the building is. So this will look like the lighter side. This will look like the darker side. So there's so many little things now you can do, and you sort of have to ad-lib some of these things. Just sort of do them as you feel necessary. And come over here, kind of tie in your shoreline. Usually I'll take a little umber and kind of blend in the edge by drifting it down. See how I'm just pulling down? That kind of adds a nice little reflective look to the edge of the water. And then we'll put all the highlights on here in a second. But before we do that, let's get our little fence back there. There's a little fence that runs across the top of this road back here. So using the same brush and using the umber and the water, sort of an inky mixture. Let's go across here like this. Come right on through, all the way across the end of the painting. Now this has a nice little touch to the piece. And if you want to put some cross rails on there, don't be afraid to do that. Just go ahead and add a few little rails. That kind of adds a nice touch to it also. You can't really see it too well when you get up in there to where the pine trees are, but you can sure see it out here, and it really looks good. Okay, see how nice that looks? So that now kind of tells the story that there has to be a road somewhere that gets to the other side of the grist mill so they can drop off their grain so they can have some flour made. Now let's come down here into the corner of the painting, right down on this side of the water, and let's put another little bush here. This will be our eye stopper on the left-hand side. Now don't make a big deal out of this particular bush. Just make it big enough that it will stop your eye but not catch your eye, okay? There is a difference. An eye stopper's job is simply to stop your eye, not to catch your eye and hold your attention, all right? It's more just something to keep you from going off the canvas, and then it helps you bounce back into the painting. Okay, now make it just sort of little bushes along the edge there, and of course, little reflection wouldn't be bad. And that kind of helps settle things down. All right, now then, let's go back up here to our wall. While you have this dark color on your brush, well, you might want to go ahead and use your steady rest. I'm going to go ahead and block in these great big, see, I'm just going to take my brush and I'm going to make stones. Yeah, I want you to notice what I'm doing here. I'm just outlining each one individually, making them different shapes and sizes so that it really has a nice character. This is great fun, especially for those of you that love detail work, okay? Detail work is not all that exciting to me if I have to spend a lot of time on it. I'm the kind that like to move on, but I like intermediate detail like this, where you can create the suggestion. Really looks like you spent hours on it, and maybe you just spent a few minutes. See how nice that looks? Because you underpainted it properly. You left it kind of smudgy. You create different little, colors and shapes within the rocks, and all you're doing is just putting some little lines here, and all of a sudden they look like rocks or stones. It's really a lot of fun. But now you can see, folks, how important it is that everything you do, every single painting, has to start with a well-grounded, well-understood underpainting. Everything has to fall into place by having a proper underpainting first. And once you've got that down, the sky's the limit. Okay, I'll come right on out here. This will taper right on off over into this section. And quite frankly, there's probably another little bridge or a road bed back over here. I've been around enough of these old mills and things to realize that They are in some fairly precarious positions because of the way they have to be located next to these streams and so forth. And almost all of them were located as close to a main road as possible so that the people, the farmers, and the people in the community could get to it easily. But sometimes we're offset just a little bit. Now, this particular thing right here, a lot of times they'll have little walkways going out to the wheel for maintenance purposes or whatever, and you would see all kinds of little things. Sometimes you'd see the board sticking up here. Maybe there's a little wall or section of the wall. And sometimes you'll see little things sticking up like that. Sometimes it's just to keep people away. So see, that adds a real nice just a few little lines to create character is really all that's necessary to make that have a little bit more finished effect. Now see how beautiful this is starting to come out. Aren't you excited about this? I certainly am. Now let's go ahead and do a little highlighting now. This time we're going to use our palette knife. Let's find our palette knife here. I know it's still here someplace. Oh, here it is. Now, just take a little bit of white down here and a little touch of orange, and let's mix it together. This is pretty much our traditional standard sunshine color that we use so often. I think I add a little yellow to it. There we go. Yeah, that's good. Okay, to the right-hand side of your tree, just put a little thin highlight. Just kind of skim the edge like this. Now see how beautiful that makes the sun come out? Now, if you want to, so you can go ahead and put a little along the edge here. This will create sort of the flatness along the shoreline. Adds a real nice sunlit effect. And, it kind of shows the little edges of the debris, a little sparkle to the water. You'll enjoy doing that, and it looks good too. Do the other section of tree. Now you don't have to do all the little teeny weeny limbs. That's not necessary. Let's see, that gives it just a little bark, and then put a little smudge in the water, just enough to kind of give it some character. Okay, see how nice that looks? Then you come over here and hit this one very quickly. Just right on the edge, just a smidgen. Now I didn't reflect this one in the water, so I'm going to go ahead and take just a little bit of umber on my little round sable brush. This is not the script brush, but the little round sable. And a little more paint would be good. And sort of reflect it just a little bit in the water. The water's a little more turbulent here anyway, so you're not going to see it as much. Now I'm going to take plain white and I'm going to skim right along the edge here. To create the little edge and the sparkle and a little bit more of a finished effect there. And you can come right on out into the water just a little bit. But see how parallel the strokes are? They're not crooked, they're parallel. This is what makes the water look flat. Okay? Yeah, that's as they say nowadays, I think that's pretty cool. It's a nice touch. And come over here a little bit. And then as usual, I like to throw in one or two little surprises to kind of make you have a little more fun. In the left-hand corner here, because we already have an eye stopper that's pretty significant on the right-hand side with the reflection there, over here we don't really have one except a little darker water. Well, also around these mills, there's usually a lot of big stones and rocks, slabs of rock. So what I'm going to do is put a nice big rock right here in the corner that's got a lot of character to it, maybe a smaller one or two next to it. And that will definitely finish out the way the painting should look as far as all of the basic components. Now, because mine's still wet, this is a good lesson for you. I'm going to scrape off the guts, or you might say the inside of that, like so. Get some of the thick paint off. Then I'm going to take my number 4 bristle brush, or number 6, either one is fine in this case. And I'm going to take burnt sienna, a little purple, and a touch of umber. And remember, the left-hand side is the dark side. So let's just kind of block in the dark side here very quickly. And there's another section of one here. Now, I know some of you panic every time we talk about rocks, but it's really hard for me to do a painting without rocks in it, or at least a couple of rocks. Most of you know that. In fact, those of you that painted with me in a class before, or been in one of my private lessons, you'll know that rocks not only are my favorite thing to paint, basically, but they also add so much character to the painting. All right, now I'm going to wipe out my brush, and I'm going to take my sunshine color, which was the orange and white. And I'm not going to really clean it that good, but I'm going to get some of the excess paint off. And then I'm going to come over here very quickly. Just going to lay some highlight right on top, like this. Okay, you see you build the rock down here in the corner. I'm going to build it up just a little bit more. Okay, now then, I'm going to put just a few little weeds coming out. Can't get through the painting without some weeds. So let's come down here to our dark green mixture that we have. Get a nice thin mixture using your script brush. Okay, roll this around, get a nice, thin, inky mixture, but it's very important that you really mix it well. So often I'll see people put a little drop of water or two and just a second or so of mixing, and that's it. You've got to really mix the pigment and the water together in order for it to work properly. Okay, now, starting over here in the corner, take your hand like this, get it going in sort of a circular motion, and pull the weeds up. Some behind the rocks, see, and some in front of the rocks. And then sort of let it taper. In other words, over here, you kind of let the weeds taper off until your eye just kind of flows down, hits the water, comes over and hits my eye stopper here, bounces back up, comes back in, and see how nice and well balanced this painting is, and your eye stays right where it's supposed to stay, focused on the red barn. Okay, let's get the rest of our weeds in here. Now you can put some other colored weeds in here if you'd like. Okay, after you've gotten your weeds in there, then we're going to highlight part of this fence here at the top of the rocks here. Okay, and I'm going to take my white. Now I'm just still using my script brush, but I'm taking white and orange. I'm going to highlight the very edge of this post here. This post here. And let me tell you why we are doing this. See how nice that contrast stands out against the darker barn? Anytime you're doing a painting and you've got a lot of darker values or areas in your painting that need a little life, put a contrasting color in front of it, and I guarantee you it just snaps it right out, makes it really look sharp. So that's what we're doing here. We're just adding some color, and it needs to be there anyway. It's the right thing to do. It's just that you kill two birds with one stone, so to speak. Okay, I'm just kind of gently highlighting. Maybe it's kind of broken, so I just bring the post down like that. And there you have a beautiful, beautiful little broken down fence that's kind of, adds a little character and contrast as well. Now, on the top edge of your stone wall there and there, you can do a similar thing, and you can try it with your script brush. If that doesn't work, you can switch to your little sable brush, but I just like to come in and cap this out. There's something about capping this out that adds that little bit of sparkle. And same thing up here. Anytime you can get a little cap on something. Now see, we basically already have it over there because we had put that on a little earlier. But right here we didn't have it, and over here we don't have it, and here we don't have it. So we need to cap this, and you will be in business. Isn't this exciting, folks? This is one of the most exciting things for me because not only is it fun to teach it and to show it to people, but it's really fun to do it too. Especially working with these new water mixable oils because they have really, really revolutionized oil painting. Now see, what I'm doing is capping the tops of these out. This will pretty much be your final thing that you really have to do here. If you want to add some other things to this to make it a little bit more interesting for yourself, that's fine. But I'm just going to go through and put some little thin caps to suggest rocks along the edge, which is, again, one of my favorite things to do. Isn't that exciting how all of a sudden just a few quick little highlights and pow, you've got some little pebbles and rocks. Really wonderful. There we go. Pretty exciting, huh? Okay. Well, listen, we're about to run out of time, folks, so before I go and mess it up and I get into the 3 Ps, remember our motto, don't piddle, play, or putter, okay? Because if you spend too much time trying to fix something that you just can't fix, or perhaps you've gone as far as you can go, you generally get it muddy and you ruin it and you get a little bit aggravated yourself. Now, we're basically done with the painting. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun for me, but I want to give you a little rundown on what we're going to do next time because it's going to be really different, a very unique thing, something that you need to be tuned in for. We're going to do a whole series of composition, design, perspective, color mixing, and all of those things that make a painting work before you get to this part of it, okay? So I hope you can join us next time. It's going to be a lot of fun. God bless you. Stay inspired. Keep painting. We'll see you again real soon on another Inspirational Painting. It covers several things, so let's get started here. I'm going to give you a little list first. Then we're going to go in and talk about composition, what it means, and how you actually develop a painting from square one before you ever pick up a paintbrush. Now, I know it's exciting to play with color and throw color on, but you know what, folks? Every time I hold one of these composition classes somewhere in the country, it's the most popular class that I ever hold, even though it may be for a day or two. Everyone comes away with so much more information because now they can go back and on their own create much more exciting paintings. And quite frankly, if you know more about the basics, you won't be quite as frustrated, which is very important for an artist because we do get frustrated a lot. You'll be a little bit more inspired because you'll have more confidence about your painting. And another thing that's important is it makes your painting better, makes it better for the viewer. And remember one thing, and I've been studying some great artists over the years and worked with many, you can be the greatest artist, the greatest painter in the world, but if you don't understand the basic components of composition, design, perspective, color theory, and some of those basic things, your painting literally just falls apart at the seams. So what I'm going to attempt to do in the next few sessions is give you a real good basic grounding of how you can become a better artist. Now, the first thing we're going to do is talk about composition and what it is, and I've brought some samples of some of my own paintings, which is a sort of a rare thing on the show here. Usually you just see my paintings I do for demonstrating and teaching purposes. I'm going to have a few of my professional pieces now that will, show you some composition techniques. Now, the first thing about composition is the definition. Now, this is not by the way, the Webster's version of what composition is. This is the artistic version, okay? Composition is simply the arrangement of objects on your canvas or your drawing paper or your watercolor paper, whatever it is you're working on, so that they are pleasing to the eye. Now that brings up an interesting question. Well, how do I know how to get from point A to point B? Well, here's the way it works, folks. When you talk about composition, you have to remember one thing. When you paint and draw, if your eye bounces around or runs off the canvas and has nothing to hold your attention, that's poor composition, okay? It's understood that your eye must maintain a focal point within the boundary of your canvas and stay there for it to be a good composition. So therefore, that makes it more pleasing, all right? So I'm going to go through a whole range of do's and don'ts, and this will help some of you correct some of the paintings you already have done. Let's start first of all with some of the different types of things under composition. First of all, not only is composition the arrangement of objects on your canvas, but then you have design. Now we're going to talk about design in relation to composition, and there are three types of composition. We're going to go over those here after I give you a little bit of idea what they're about here. You have your triangle-shaped composition, you have an L-shaped composition, and this one we call the center type of composition. Now let me give you another explanation here about what this is all about. Now every artist in the world has his or her own interpretation of what design, composition is all about. We all know that it has to be pleasing to the eye. And yes, there are many little theories. There's a lot of books out on the art market that talk about composition. But basically, and I've read most of them, we all have the same basic idea of what it takes to have a good composition. It's just that we all have our own little approach to get there. Now, strictly as a beginner, a basic painter, or an intermediate painter, I'm going to teach you the basics of composition. At that point, you can take this a step further into more advanced and professional techniques if you choose to, because some of the compositions get very complicated, which is what the triangle-shaped composition is all about. And you'll know where you should spend most of your time, whether you're a basic beginner or an intermediate or an advanced painter. You know which area of the composition of these three types where you should spend most of your time. All right, after we talk about composition, design, and the three types of composition, that also encompasses some other things. We also have to talk about negative space. Now, briefly, negative space is simply the space around an object. Let me give you an example here of a painting, and we're going to cover this more intensely later. But look at this cardinal painting. The space around the object, the area behind, around the object, is called negative space. That's really what forms your object. It's not the outline of the object, it's the space you leave that creates the object, okay? So that's what negative space is all about, and it's also the same rule that we use when we do trees or rock formations. It doesn't matter what you do, it's the space around your object that creates the most eye flow that's more conducive to good composition, okay? So that's one thing. Another thing that we're going to cover under composition is how to create depth. Now, depth is covered in a lot of ways. Of course, perspective is the key thing. So under depth, our key component is perspective. Now, perspective is simply creating depth in a painting when you have objects that are receding into the distance, like a row of fence posts, the side of a building, when you're standing not square in front of it, but to the side, and you want to see it properly go into the distance. It also helps to create the illusion of all kinds of things in a painting. If you understand perspective, and we're going to cover two things, 1-point perspective and 2-point perspective. Okay? Those are the basic things we're going to cover in perspective, 1- and 2-point perspective. Now, these, by the way, are designed for that landscape, the animal painter, seascape painter, mountain painter, or whatever type of painter you are. These particular items are designed for you specifically, so you'll have a good idea of what it's all about, because some of these go way, way, way on up into more advanced techniques, but you don't need to know about that just yet. Okay, then we're going to cover such things as shadows, reflections, planes, and a little bit about basic drawing. And we'll talk a little bit about color theory, how to create values and how to use the complementary color scheme to make your painting do its thing. But this is mostly geared towards the, you might say, the technical aspects of laying out a painting before you ever get started, okay? So now you can see some of the basic components we're going to cover. Make sure you write those down and have them ready, because we're going to cover them one at a time extensively, and it may take for the next several weeks, because perspective, composition, all of these things will take a whole program or more just on themselves. All right, now let's get started. I'm going to take this one off, lay it here so I can refer back to it also. Now, it'd probably be a good idea for those of you that are following me along here to have the proper tools. One of the things that I use is a piece of soft vine charcoal. Now, most of you know I use this in the painting programs because I use it to sketch with, and it works real well. It works good on this newsprint paper. Or if you prefer, you can use a 2B, a 4B, or even a 6B drawing pencil. A 2B or a 4B is best because they're fairly soft, but they're not too soft. A 6B is a little bit too soft, and it loses its point quicker. So I would recommend a 2B or a 4B drawing pencil and or a piece of soft vine charcoal just to create sort of your little library of notes here. Now, we're going to cover a lot of ground in the next few weeks, folks, so please don't hesitate to, if you get a little lost in this, to give us a call. We'll talk to you about it. We'll help you any way that we can, because my job is to make you understand it so that you can have a lot more fun with your painting. All right, the first thing about composition, you have to first research. Now let's talk about research for just a minute. Now, as I, again, teach people how to paint, so often I have people come into class, have all these great thoughts about painting, and they have things that they want to copy or duplicate. Folks, the first thing about composition is to understand your subject. So the first thing you want to do before you ever think about these basic components is your subject. What is your subject? That's number one. Now, believe it or not, more people don't even think about their subject before they might know they want to do a landscape, but they don't know what's going to happen in the landscape. So here's what happens when you get ready to design a painting. First, you need a subject. Number two, you need to come up with the objects that are going to be within the composition that are a part of your subject. For instance, if you're going to do, say, a mountain scene, well, maybe in that mountain scene you're going to have other objects. Maybe you're going to have a little mountain cabin or some pine trees, or maybe you're going to have a waterfall and some rocks or some bears or some deer. You've got to understand that before you ever start your painting, you've got to have a fairly good picture, a roadmap, so to speak, of where you're going. So first you have your subject, whatever type of thing it might be, then the objects within that range of subjects, and then number three, the next thing, and probably one of the most important things, is you need to pick your atmospheric condition. Okay, now that simply means what time of the year is it, or basically what's happening on that particular painting. Is it snowing? Is it going to be cold and windy, wet and rainy? You have to decide in this painting so that you can begin adjusting in your own thoughts in your mind. Next is, what's the atmosphere? Okay, so then you can automatically almost go right into your color scheme, all right? So after you've established what your atmosphere is, you need to get the time of day. Now, a lot of us make mistakes in our painting when we have a lot of things happen. We may have a sunset, but we have our shadows geared towards, say, mid-afternoon, or we may have an early morning part of our painting, and our painting's all confused. So it's very important that you know what time of the day it is, and you be consistent with all your shadows, reflections, anything that's going to be affected by the time of day. That's important, okay? I see more mistakes made in that area. The next thing that you want to talk about is color scheme. Okay? Now, after you've established the basic research material, your subject, what objects are going to be there, the atmosphere, the time of day, then you have to start thinking about your color scheme. Now, most of us nowadays are thinking more in terms of what's decorative, okay? And that's fine if that's what you choose to do. I don't like to paint that way. I paint whatever fits the mood at the time I'm in, the mood of the painting at the time. I don't really care if it's going to match my couch or my carpet or my wall. I paint what's best for the painting at the time, okay? Not to say you can't come back later and add accent colors, especially if it's a commission piece. Now, I do lots of commissions for collectors around the country, and a lot of times I have to throw in these things to make it a little bit more conducive to their color scheme, which is okay. But for the most part, to begin your painting, you need to come up with a color scheme that's conducive to your subject, the objects in there, and all the other components of your research material. Now, folks, once you've established in your mind where you're going with these basic things, then the very next thing you do is what we call thumbnail sketches, okay? Now, so many times when we start painting, we just start painting or sketching and we don't even plan ahead. You see, it's kind of like building a house. You can't build a house without a good foundation. You can't build it without a good set of plans. You can't just start building. Oh, you can, but you make lots of mistakes. Sometimes you make some fatal mistakes that may cause the thing to fall down or have to start over or whatever. So if you'll draw yourself a good roadmap to any painting you do, you're going to eliminate a lot of the frustration and the fear of painting that so many of us as beginners have. So the next thing you're going to do is what we call thumbnail sketches. And here's what a thumbnail sketch is. Now we get the term thumbnail sketch, and of course this is a term that's been around forever from artists. A thumbnail sketch is simply a smaller version of what you intend to put on your finished piece. And it's just little compositions like this. It could be a vertical, rectangle shape, whatever your canvas size or your paper size is going to be. You've already established in your mind that you're going to have certain things. And a thumbnail sketch may only be a 30-second sketch, okay? And it will have the basic components of your painting. For instance, maybe a mountain. It may also include some study notes, color schemes that you've seen or observed, textures, atmospheres, smells, and all those things that go into a painting. Maybe, you just give a quick line here. Maybe you know where your pine trees are going to go. Maybe there's a little house setting up here in the distance. Maybe there's a footpath that's going down into the middle of the painting, and maybe there's a big rock over here, or some mud puddles, or a fence post. What you'll do is, after you've established your subject, you get some of your objects in your mind, and you're using photographs or whatever you're working from, which, by the way, I'll show you a little bit about that. In completing our last series of paintings, you remember we were using the old mill. Well, I took endless dozens of these photographs to create, in my mind, all the different subjects that I was going to be using in my painting. All right, well, the main subject, of course, is the barn, but within there you have different objects. You have the trees, you have the bridge, you have the water, you have a lot of different things, folks. You have the old wheel that turns the grinder, that grinds up into flour. Here's part of it in here. I took lots of different angles. There's the water coming over that turns the wheel. All right, you may take lots. There's some close-ups of some trees there on the other side that we put in the background. Here's the other side of the bank. These are all things, folks, that you have to have in advance so that when you get this settled, you can move right into your thumbnail sketches and you can begin developing your painting. And what I normally do with my thumbnail sketches, and by the way, I may do 15 or 20, maybe 30 or 40 thumbnail sketches before I ever settle on the one that best suits my needs, okay? Well, quite frankly, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good to do a thumbnail sketch unless you know what's going to happen in all the other basic components of composition. So now that we've covered all the basics and the things you need to be prepared for, let's get into the real meat of what composition is all about. Okay, now you know where you're headed. So let's draw sort of our first layout, our first type of composition, which is what we call an L-shaped composition, okay? Now let me give you some real good information. Let's draw a nice canvas here. We'll call this a thumbnail sketch, if you will. Just something loose and free that will not be something you're going to use for any finished piece. Now, let me tell you when you pick an L-shaped composition. Let me give you a sort of a good example. An L-shaped composition is selected for your type of painting when it's a simple subject. All right? Now, let me give you a couple of thoughts about this. What an L shape simply means is, if you go back to the basic definition of composition, it's the arrangement of objects on your canvas so that it's pleasing to the eye. Think about the eye flow in an L, okay? L shape. Either to the right or to the left. See, this L could go either direction. Now, before we get into this, let me tell you some of the basic components of composition that make or break whichever type you choose. You need to have the following things in these compositions. You need to have eye stoppers. Well, I didn't say I was a great speller. I'm just an artist. You need to have eye stoppers, which create a section in the painting where your eye will stop before it goes off of the canvas. Now I'm going to bring out a painting here that I want you to take a look at here, and this is really what an L-shaped composition is all about. Okay, let's think about this for just a moment, if you will. Now, when I developed this painting, I already had in mind that I was going to do a desert scene, sort of in the desert Southwest. I wanted these great big rock formations. That was settled. I wanted sort of a late afternoon, midday scene with a clean, clear sky. I had all those things established in my mind, okay? But it's so simple, I knew I couldn't have a lot of other objects or any other subjects that make this thing work. I wanted the rocks themselves to be what was all about. So because of its simplicity, folks, I automatically knew that the L-shaped composition was going to be the one I would have to work from. Now, let me show you something, and I'm going to do something here that will scare you just a little bit, but that's okay. I'm used to doing that. Let me get a paper towel here. Now, I want you to think for a minute, just before I do this, you think, what is the movement of your eye in this particular painting? Which direction does your eye flow? All right, let's think about it. My eye goes down like this and flows across like this. Now, a lot of us don't even think about that until you're taught that. That's why I'm so excited to spend the next few weeks with you going over all of these wonderful little tricks that make painting so exciting, because it's sort of behind the scenes kind of things that most of us don't even think about. When you look at this painting, yes, you see all of the other things going on in here, but my main subject is the beautiful rock formations, and my eye flows in the shape of an L. All right, now let me talk to you about some of the other components of the L-shaped composition that are so exciting. Number one, now remember we talked about eye stoppers. Now, before I say it, can you find out on this painting where the eye stoppers are? Think about it just a second. I'll let you focus for a minute. We've already established that our eye flows this way, or it could have been the other way if the rocks had been over here. But because of the strong movement of the eye, what would this be? That would be your eye stopper. Isn't that exciting? Eye stoppers are the other objects that are in your painting that stop you from going off of the canvas, and that will keep you well within the range of the L-shaped composition. Now, there are many, many, many different uses for this L-shaped composition, and I just don't have time to go over all of them with you. I'll give you a few little rough sketches in a minute to show you some other uses for it. But now let's talk about some of the other components. Now, you still have a lot of other things going on in the painting, okay? Now, I want everyone to pay attention here. An L-shaped composition is generally the object, the center of interest itself, okay? For instance, this could just be a large tree here that's beautifully leafed out, or a dead tree, and it's the main feature in the painting, so your eye follows like this. And the way the L works, if you'll notice, I've used other helpers, okay, to get to my eye stopper and back again. What have we used here, folks, to help my eye in this composition? Think about it for a minute, all right? Now, I have used ridges, the washes, the erosion in the dirt to create movement, all right? So when my eye comes down, look at these little ridges. Everything gently gets me moving, including the more distant, faded out ridges on those back mountains. Even though they aren't the feature, they still aid in the composition of the basic flow of the L, okay? Look what else. I've got all of these ridges here. The washes and the erosion. I've got the subtle use of brush and rock formations and the grasses that create a movement. All right, and when it comes across, now look what happens. It comes across like this. We hit this beautiful, bright, sunlit section. Then, pow, all of a sudden we hit this really exciting little explosion of brush and color. And it's really, what it does is it stops your eye, but it also is so attractive, you want to stay there for just a second. But you know what? I'm going to give you a real good piece of advice here. Never allow your eye stoppers, this is critical, never allow your eye stoppers to compete with your main subject or the center of interest, okay? Write that down or review this tape again, but never allow an eye stopper to compete with your center of interest. It's okay for it to have some nice little design and some color, but it's real bad if you let it become too important in the painting, because then you start moving into some more of the advanced categories, and there's some other rules you have to follow to get to there. So we've conquered the first phase of composition, and that's the L shape, okay? All the rest of the stuff is just filler material. It does not compete with any of the rest of the painting. I've got darker colors in the foreground and shadow so that I don't focus. I have less detail. Those are the things that make the L-shaped composition work. You focus on the subject itself where your eye flows, and you can still get away with lots of other subjects. For instance, beautiful tree with the contrast against the rocks. It's really a neat subject, but it doesn't compete because it's part of it, okay? So that's important. It would have been a bad decision to make a huge tree right here and compete with this. So I just made it part of it. All right, does that make sense to you? Isn't that exciting? Now there's 1,000 takeoffs from this, all right? Now let's put this down. And let me give you another quick example here because we're running out of time, as usual. But say, for instance, and of course I'm from the Midwest, and say I've got a little prairie here, and I have a windmill here. And I'm just going to use simple sketches here, just as a practical matter. Now, I've already gone through all my things. I know what I want to do here. I just got to compose it now. I have a windmill, and it's the main subject. Well, most windmills have a water tank, okay? Well, if I put the water tank over here, what happens? You now have split the composition in half, right down the middle, and you bounce to it instead of flow with it. So the secret here is to create an overlap. Put the tank here, slightly overlapping the windmill. Let's just see if we can rub that off a little bit. Okay. Now you've created an eye flow, but just by itself, it's still not very interesting. Yes. Yeah, you can go back like we had on the other painting, some distant hills. You can have some little bushes. You can have a beautiful shadow here from an evening sun or a morning sun. And now you've got an eye flow. And what if I wanted to put some cows in there? Whoa, what would that do to us? Well, as long as the cows are a part of the L, you can put them in there if you want to. But just don't put them way over here. See, if you put any other objects over here that compete with the main subject, you're going to get yourself in trouble, and then you lose the beautiful eye flow that you wanted to create with the simplistic approach to this. So your cattle would be here, all right? All right, these are pretty good looking cows, aren't they? As long as they overlap your subject and they are part of the L, then you can get away with adding a lot of different objects, folks, and still have an incredible composition, okay? Well, we're out of time for this segment. Next week, we're going to continue with composition and get into some of the more complicated forms and a lot of other things. It's going to be a lot of fun. So God bless you. Stay inspired, keep painting, and we'll see you again real soon on another Inspiration of Painting.
Today's lesson and
with the next composition, which is the triangle-shaped composition. However, I want to give you a quick rundown on what we accomplished last week so that make sure that you didn't forget or lose anything. Now, remember we left off last time talking about the L-shaped composition, okay? Using the L to create the eye flow, the use of eye stoppers and other objects to create interest, but your main eye flows with your object or your main center of interest, okay? So that's a critical part of composition, especially if you're a beginner. That's the one you'll use most of the time. Now, if you're going to move on...
This is a test of the emergency alert system. This is only a test.
Test of the EAS and emergency broadcast system. This is only a test. This message is brought to you through the cooperation of the local broadcasters and the Office of the Sheriff of Spokane County. This was only a test.
And it creates the form of a triangle. It may be kind of an odd-shaped triangle, but that's the look you're after. However, before we get started here, I want to give you a little bit of just a tidbit of information about how you can do some composing on your own when you're out in the field. Now, I mentioned to you last week that it's a good idea to have a lot of reference material handy. We talked about that. Take lots of photographs. A good 35-millimeter camera is excellent. But one thing I do when I'm composing something and I want to have a big tree in there or any other object for that matter, if I'm not sure how it's going to look, I will make my own little viewfinder out of a piece of paper. And the way you do this is you just take a piece of paper and you fold it in half, and then you take some scissors or a pocket knife, which I just used, and you cut out whatever the shape of your canvas is going to be, whether it's vertical or horizontal. Okay, then when you open it up, you see you have the shape of whatever canvas. Now, it may be tall, it may be wider, it doesn't matter. So try to get at the shape of whatever canvas you're working on. Now, let's see if we can use this painting over here as an example, all right? We're going to use this, when you look through here, and I don't know if they can do this with the camera or not, but you can only see certain parts of that painting, all right? In this case, let me just look through here. If I want to have the house and one of the doves, I move this around to where it's compositionally correct, using the things that we've talked about last week or in our other sessions, and that's what you need to be doing here. So that's a fun thing to use when you're out in the field. It really is effective, simple tool, doesn't cost you hardly anything, and all your great artists use that. So that's just a fun little thing I wanted to throw at you. Now, getting back to composition. Now remember, when we talk about composition, we talk about a lot of things, folks. We're talking about different subjects and different objects, and the more you add to your painting, now this is where this next series is so important, the more subjects you add to your painting, or more objects, the more complicated it becomes, and you need to have some more rules or guidelines to go by. All right, so let's talk about this for a second. A triangle-shaped composition will be used. You'll know to select that type of composition. And remember now, you're going to, after you've done your research, after you established in your mind where you're going, what type of composition, then here is what you have to decide next. How many sub-objects are going to be in here? For instance, say you do a thumbnail here, and you already know you're going to have a mountain, so you do a quick thumbnail of this mountain, okay? But perhaps you know also you're going to have a waterfall. Okay, so you're going to have this waterfall coming over these rocks. Remember, these are just thumbnails to give you an idea. All right? The next thing you think in your mind you want to have in this painting is, you want to have some big fluffy clouds. Maybe a storm brewing here. And you're saying to yourself, okay, in this painting I'd like to have some pine trees. All right? So you have pine trees. And in this painting, you've decided you want to have a log cabin. Okay, see, it gets a little more complicated, Where in the world are you going to put your log cabin? Well, you may have to establish another layer of ground back there, another plane, another part of the painting to put this cabin on right here. Okay, and it sets way back here in the distance, just in front of the mountain. Okay? Then you're going to say to yourself, well, I better have maybe a deer standing in here. Where am I going to put the deer? All right, so you establish that you're going to have that subject or object in there. Then you've got grasses and you've got big boulders in the foreground. Okay, my point here, folks, is the more things you add to your painting or the more objects you think you need, you've got to have a format to follow that will give you good eye flow. Remember the definition. Composition is the arrangement of objects on your canvas so that it is pleasing to the eye. All right? So once you've established how many objects you want in there, we now go to the triangle-shaped composition. In the first form of a triangle, and there are three different types. The first triangle-shaped composition is the type where your eye will follow the shape of the triangle. Let me give you a good example here. Let's go over here to the painting on the wall. Now, I want everyone to pay close attention to this. This is very, very important. Now, in reality, the painting is truly quite simple, but I've got 2 or 3 main objects now that I want to focus on, you see, as opposed to the L-shaped composition that we spoke of in this painting, where we only had one main object and it follows the L, okay? Here we have 3 different objects that are important to the painting. Watch what happens when I follow the proper technique for the triangle-shaped composition. Now, I'm going to use the charcoal. Don't panic because it wipes right off, okay? When I look at this, of course, I see the house, I see the dove, I see the barbed wire, I see the clouds and the grasses, and all those things are there. But what characteristic does this composition have? Oh, here we are. We go from the house. Just watch this. Your eye starts here, generally speaking. It follows this line across. We have a fence, 2 different types. We have horizontal movement in the ground. We have this ridge of trees. We have clouds, and then we hit this ridge of trees. We go to our other focal point, and all of a sudden what happens, folks? Your eye then follows this line. Now, because you have eliminated any detail on this section of the painting, now think about this for a minute, this no longer is in contention with the rest of the objects that are your main subjects. So this is not a matter of concern to you. Now, it would be a problem if you started putting a lot of stuff in here, and that's where I find most of us make our mistakes, folks. We think we have to have everything in the world in there, and we put too much emphasis on things that surround our main subjects or our center of interest, and we forget that that will create a detraction and a deterrent to your proper eye flow. So let me give you a little bit more information. When you have selected your main subjects, you have created the perfect eye flow, please don't allow your eye stoppers or any other subjects or object in here to compete with your center of interest, okay? Folks, I can't tell you how important that is. That's critically important. Never allow any objects to compete with your center of interest once you've selected it, okay? So take a look one more time. Your eye flows, and you've created this triangle. Right? Isn't that exciting? Now, most of us never would have thought about that before. But now I've got eye stoppers here. I've got eye stoppers here, and frankly, these pull my eye back in. They overlap the wire a little bit. I come down, and I want you to notice something. Even down here in the shadowed part, I eliminated a lot of the highlighting that's on the wire simply because I didn't want it to catch my eye. Or I kept it in shadow. So there's a nice, simple type of triangle-shaped composition. But it's a little more complicated than the L shape that we spoke of. We have 3 main subjects, and they are the triangle. So that's one type. Let me give you another example here, and I'll pull out a painting here, one of my prints. All right, let's take a look at this. Now, think about this one for a second. I also have several things in here that I want to be focused on. I love the dead trees. I needed the geese and the ducks in here, or just the geese. I wanted some nice background atmosphere. But I want you to notice what kind of triangle, what kind of composition we have. It's a triangle. All right, let's move back over here to the board where I can explain this a little bit easier. All right. Now then, take a good look at this. And let's take a look at where our eye stoppers are and where our eye flow is. Now, because I wanted all the trees, I wanted the sunset, I wanted just a sort of a pastel painting, my main focus, of course, is what? The geese. All right? Well, as opposed to the one we just looked at where we had several different subjects or objects, we now have created a triangle shape that's all-inclusive in one little triangle, okay? I want everyone to pay attention to this. All right, notice my eye flow. Here, I hit this limb, I come back down, what do? All right, we follow the shape of our eye stays well within this range, and you've created this triangle. Now, normally you wouldn't recognize it as a triangle until you've been taught the proper way to make it work. Now, what are the use of the other objects in here. Those are your eye stoppers and the filler material that truly finish the painting but don't compete with your main center of interest. See, the secret to a good painting is you have to have a center of interest. So here's what I do. Look away for a minute. Focus on it. What do you look at right away? You focus on the geese. Why do you focus on the geese? You focus on the geese because we've properly arranged the other objects so that you will spend time here and not out here and not over here. And yes, we have a movement this way, but I kept my eye from going off by putting the tree all the way up and bring all these limbs back down into so that my eye stays within the triangle. Does everybody understand that? Isn't that exciting how you can actually use your center of interest as the actual triangle? So that's the first type of composition where you're using the triangle shape, that is where the actual center of interest are the triangle themselves. Now that's one way. Now don't forget, your eye stoppers are very critical, folks, but they should not compete with your main center of interest. Okay? Please remember that. You're going to get tired of me telling you about that, but that's the truth. All right, now let's put this one aside, and let's go to the next type of triangle-shaped composition. Okay? Now I've got one here that's kind of interesting. And remember now, all of these are different versions of a triangle, and there are many, many takeoffs, okay? Now the next type of triangle-shaped composition is where you have let's say your center of interest is right here, and you may have several triangles that point to your center of interest, all right? As opposed to the one where your center of interest is the subject itself. Now we have a center of interest, and I'll show you an example here, with triangles that point to that. In other words, where all of the points of the triangle come together in different angles, and that's where your eye focuses. Now when you look at this painting here called No Stranger Here of these cardinals, how in the world, other than the fact that those cardinals are, of course, are bright red and it's complemented with the green park bench, how are we going to keep our eye there? What is the point? What makes that work? Well, here's how it works. Now, until I point this out to you, sometimes it's really hard to see it. My focus is, when you first look at this, of course, is the cardinal, this first cardinal right here. And then you, of course, notice the bench and the other cardinals and so forth and so on. Now, remember what I told you. We're not talking about a perfect geometrical triangle. We're just talking about the basic flow in a triangle formation. And it may vary from painting to painting. Notice what we've got here. I wanted my focal point to be here. I established that by going over all of my basics in the beginning. All right? Now look what I've done. I knew I didn't want to have a whole lot of stuff in here to take my eye away, but I didn't want to leave myself off either. So the first thing I do is I put me a tree over here with a tree limb that comes back in. And look what my eye does. What does it do, folks? It follows back down towards my main subject. Then I take another look at this and I say, okay, that helps that side, but what about the other part of this? Well, here I put a collection of trees that are so powerful and so strong that they could become a deterrent to the composition unless I did what? Yes, you got it. I overlapped my objects with the park bench, and you could, in effect, almost make an L-shaped composition out of this if you didn't have all the space around it that you needed to get back into the center. And it's a little more complicated. So here we have another triangle. You see? Here, you've created a triangle here, and if you pull all of your lines back into here, you create a triangle type effect that causes you to focus right here at this part of the painting. So sometimes you have a subject where you will have other objects that lead you to the center of interest, creating several triangles that focus in one spot. Okay? So that's another use for triangles, and it's one of the more complicated uses because sometimes we will put too much in it. So let me show you something. Notice how simplistic the rest of the painting is. In fact, from about this tree back, you don't even see any detail there. You can't tell if that's sky, if it's water, or what it is. That's what it's all about. It's called depth of field. It's very much like taking a photograph and you let the background be a little blurry or a little bit distorted so that you'll focus here. And that's what we've done, folks. We've focused here with all of our detail. We've eliminated detail here and here and here and here, and we've focused our detail right here where the triangles meet and form to create the center of interest. Isn't that exciting? Tell you what, when I learned this technique for creating composition, it improved my paintings 100%. Most of the national awards that I've won have been on my strength of composition, and that's what I like to teach because it will improve your painting, and you'll be a lot happier. Okay, now you understand a little bit about that. Let's put this one away, and we're going to move into another type of composition now of the triangle. Actually, let's take another look here at one more little piece of information about the one I just spoke of. Now, this is kind of an interesting painting, and it kind of goes back to the first type of composition we spoke of because I wanted you to see something here. It doesn't matter what subject you're doing, folks. It doesn't matter what time of the day, what kind of atmosphere you have. As long as you compose well, you can do anything. Where does your eye flow in this painting? Okay, think about this for just a second. This bird is pulling me down. Okay? I hit the wagon, and because the wagon's angled this way, okay? Come back here. Here's my triangle. All right, here again, because I wanted my subject to be focused right in the center here, this is a type of composition where the actual center of interest is the triangle itself. This is your eye stopper on this side, this is your eye stopper on this side, and of course you have your helpers that pull your eye back in there. So remember, you can do anything you want to. This just gives you another example of a type of painting where you can use one or the other types of triangle compositions. And it's a fairly complicated painting. It has a lot of stuff in it, but because it was arranged properly and it doesn't compete with this is where my eye flows and you focus there, and it's just beautiful, okay? So that's kind of exciting. Now I'm going to give you probably another one that's one of the more complicated types of composition as far as a triangle go. Now, the next type of triangle composition, and this, quite frankly, would be when you really have a whole lot of things going on in your painting. You have a lot of subjects, and you're saying to yourself, okay, maybe you've got a commission to do for someone, and you're sitting there thinking, well, here's the list of things that went in this painting. Of course, artistically, you may have to eliminate some things or add some things to make it work, but there may be quite a few things in here. Well, this is the kind of composition where you may have a triangle, say like this, and your object is within the triangle, okay? Now let me square all this away with you. The first type of composition we used where the actual objects was the triangle. The second type that we just talked about is where you had several triangles pointing toward your center of interest. The third type of triangle composition is where you may have a triangle that is surrounded by objects and your focal point is within the triangle. Now let me give you a good example on this one. And let's see here. It's a lot of fun. Here we go. Okay. This is kind of an interesting painting because this is something that I love to paint, some of the Southwest types of things. But now I want everyone to take a quick look at this. Just kind of focus for a second. And you think where your eye is focused right now. Now, forget about the triangle for the moment. Just think where your eye focuses for a second. My eye immediately goes to the teepee. All right? How come it does that? Well, that's the next thing you want to think about, folks, because if you don't put a lot of emphasis on how you got there, you're going to end up with a lot of problems for yourself. All right, well, I knew in this particular painting, which, by the way, was a commission from one of my collectors, he wanted the teepee, a little bit of a setting. He wanted the, like someone's there. He wanted the deer over here, and he wanted it set in a snow scene in the wintertime, of course, with lots of trees in the forest, on the edge of a forest. Well, that gave me quite a challenge because that simply meant I got to put a lot of things in here to make it work. And he wanted the stream and the frozen water and all that stuff. All right, so the first thing I did was I located on my sketch where I wanted the teepee. I went ahead and just sort of sketched it in my thumbnail. I put it on a hillside, all right? So I knew I wanted to focus there. I knew he wanted all these other objects in there, and so I was going to have to come up with a solution to the problem. Well, here's what I decided. After about 15 or 20 thumbnail sketches, playing with different ideas, I decided that I would put the teepee on the hill. I would go ahead and put the camp around it and, kind of finish that section out so it would have a lot of strength there. And then I decided that in an effort to really focus my eye here, I would put a big tree on this side, which sort of frames in that part of the painting. See, what you're actually doing with this type of triangle composition is you're using the triangle as a frame to frame your subject, your center of interest, so to speak. So I want to focus here. So here's the first thing I did. Here's the first thing that comes up. That's sort of the edge of a triangle. Then by bringing my limbs in and down, watch what happens and see where the triangle is. This is so exciting to me. I just get excited every time I think about this. My limbs come down, and look what I did though. I made sure that my background trees also followed this line of eye flow. Okay, take a look. It comes down and it kind of gets stuck right here on this deer. All right, which is a good thing because all of a sudden now the deer becomes an eye stopper, the tree becomes a helper to the eye stopper, and now we can come back this direction and we have a log that is sort of buried into the other side of the triangle. And you see how your eye flows up and around your object. Now, folks, keep in mind that this is the most complicated of all. So this would be for those of you that are going a little beyond the basics into the more intermediate, advanced, and eventually professional level of painting. But even at that, it's important for you to realize that if you're in the basic range of learning how to paint, to stay away from some of this stuff, because I have seen more beginners get into so many things before they're ready, and that's what causes discouragement. My job is to help you understand where you need to be at this particular point in your career as an artist. And right now, this type of composition will take you a long ways after you've learned some of the other basics. So let's study this one more time. We go up, I go across, we come down, we then flow back this way, following the edge of the water. We hit our tree, and we come back up, back down, across, back up. There's your triangle. Isn't that exciting? Now, what have we got in here that aids in that composition? Where are our eye stoppers? Well, one of them we talked about was the deer. Now, he is not the focal point. He is another subject that we want to see because this particular person wanted the deer, and they're sort of as a symbolic thing with the deer and the Indian. So we had to put him in there. Now, I could have gotten away without him and been perfectly happy, and it wouldn't have made a big difference. It wouldn't have made the painting good or bad. It just would have been not there. But because the composition is so well designed, it didn't matter, because that's where I want to focus. All right, so we come down here. The deer becomes an eye stopper. All the bushes and the weeds become eye stoppers. This log could have stopped us cold in our tracks if we hadn't angled it. So now we can get underneath it, follow the angle of the water, back up. We let the darkness of the water here keep us from going off. Over here, we let the darkness of the snow keep us from going off. And we pull our weeds back towards the center. So that gets you back up into the line. You see, folks, your eye stoppers are aids to getting you back on track to your triangle shape or whatever composition you're using. That's what that's for. You see, it goes up, hits this. So if you happen to wonder a little bit out here what you're going to do because of this, look what I did, because you're going to get into this problem once in a while. He had to have the dead log in there for whatever reason, okay? So I figured, well, if we're going to have a dead log in there, let's have it part of the composition. So I've got it angled here, of course, pointing up towards the teepee. It's coming back here and it's interesting, but now it hits this line of snow and it doesn't go off anymore. All of a sudden my eye hits this line of snow and gets me back on track with my triangle, okay? So you see, folks, everything has an important part in your composition. So we've used everything that we've talked about. We've put our eye stoppers in place. We have good composition. We've used the proper color scheme, which we'll talk more about in some of our next sessions. Well, as usual, we're out of time, and here's one of the things I want to end with on this particular session. Whenever you get ready to choose a composition, please be sure that it fits the proper use of your subject or your object. In other words, if you've got a simple object you want to focus on, use the simple composition. If you have a lot of complicated things, use another type. Be sure you understand when to use the right composition. And one of the last things, don't forget, whenever you're ready to start your composition, always make several thumbnail sketches first. Get an idea in your head where you're going, then you can come back and start laying it out, okay? Now, in our next session, we're going to concentrate on the center type composition, which is going to be a situation like this where we have a portrait, a figure, or an animal, and there's no background, okay? So that'll be our focus in our next session. I look forward to seeing you then. I hope you've enjoyed this as much as I have. God bless you. Stay inspired and keep painting. We'll see you again real soon on another Inspiration of Painting. We are going to continue talking about what makes a good painting before you ever put the paint on there. Now, I know it's more fun to get your brushes and your paints out and have a lot of fun splashing a little color here and there, but quite frankly, that's what gets you in trouble unless you know what's going to happen when you start splashing the color around. So, if you're joining us for the first time, just grab your pencil or a piece of charcoal and your notepad and your sketch pad and just follow along, and I guarantee you when you're done with these next few sessions, you're going to have a whole notebook full of wonderful, helpful hints on how to compose a painting to make your life a little bit more exciting and to cut down on the frustration of being a painter. Of course, we don't want to be like Van Gogh and cut your ear off because you were frustrated. Well, not that that's going to happen to any of us, but one of the biggest problems that most people have as artists, especially beginners, is we get frustrated. And we get frustrated because we don't know what we're doing. Well, here's where we've been. As you know, we've been talking about composition. What goes into a composition, in terms of research. Now, what we're going to do today, we're going to talk about the perspective of a painting. But now we're going to add something else to our list here so that we don't forget. And as we have talked about subjects and objects, the atmosphere, what time of day it is, we're going to talk a little more about color scheme, which will be really towards the end. And then, of course, number 6, we want to talk about light, which means whichever direction. You've got to have a sunlight. It's got to be coming from the left to the right, behind or forward. There's a lot of different types of lighting that you need to consider when you're working on a composition. And so don't forget to add light to your list of things on your research material. You need to know where your light's coming from, really, before you ever begin. All right? Now, remember we left off talking about perspective. And last week we covered the center type composition for those of you that are portrait, figure painters, or still life painters. Now we're going to cover something probably that's the most difficult thing to understand, so I want you to pay real close attention. You may need to have a yardstick or a ruler that's at least 24 inches long if you can get one, and that'll help you just holding the lines in place. Now remember, perspective is also one of the things that causes depth in a painting. We talked about depth being created in the painting in 2 ways. Number 1, by your value system, by lightening your colors, creating a lighter value as they recede into the distance. That makes things look more distant. But another thing is when you perspect something, as it goes into the distance, it gets smaller, okay, and closer together. So let's do something here. We're going to work on what we call 1-point and 2-point perspective. Some of you may have never even heard of perspective. What is perspective? Well, it's simply taking an object, just generally speaking, it's a man-made object, like a building, a barn, or any object that's got 4 or square edges, and you stand at the corner or at the side, and you're looking down the edge of it, okay? Let me give you a couple of examples. Let's draw a line here so that you'll have some idea what's going on here. Okay, draw a horizontal line. And in fact, in perspective, that's what we call the horizon line. So we can just label it HL. Okay? Now that's simply the point where everything merges at some point in time. That's where, the sky and the ground eventually reach each other. Okay? And then everything merges together as a line. That's called the horizon line. Now, on every horizon line, for every perspective object that you're going to have what we call a vanishing point. That's the point where all the perspective lines meet. So, just for the sake of showing you what it is, let's put a point over here somewhere. Say right there. And you can label that VP for vanishing point. Now we're going to talk about 1-point perspective first. Now, if you were an architect or an engineer, there are many, many, many different phases to perspective that we'll never even get close to here, okay? It's not important for you to know. This little class here, or this little session, has been designed strictly for the basic beginners and intermediate painters who want to have a little more information on how to make a building stand up straight, how to get the roof line on correctly, and how to make things work a little bit more effectively in your painting when you add buildings and other objects of like that. All right, for instance, let's say you're working with a small building or a house in the foreground of your painting, and you're standing right in front of it. One-point perspective simply means is that you're only going to perspect one side of your object, okay? Now, we're not composing anything yet, folks. We're just simply learning about perspective. Then you can apply it to your composition later. For instance, let's put our building right here. All right, so everyone draw a rectangle. Now notice I've drawn the rectangle where that it splits the horizon line, and now you can set these rectangles above or below or right on the line, way up in the sky. You can put it anywhere. It depends on what you're trying to achieve here. And the way you figure out what you're doing is you take your reference material. Let me find my barn here. And you look at your here we go, your barn. And one of the important things here is you have to decide for yourself where your horizon line is going to be and where the building is in relation to the horizon line. In this case, see this mountain back here, or this hill, and the ground, wherever those two meet, for the most part, that's about where your horizon line will be. So if I were drawing this building, the bottom of my building, if I drew the line right there, about a fourth of it is below the line and the rest is above the line. So whenever you're looking at something that you want to perspect, these are basic rules, by the way, always look at your subject, locate your horizon line on your photograph or on your sketch, then you just place the shape of your building on that particular area. But for the sake of this learning, let's just put our square right there, or our rectangle, and here's how you perspect something. Now, some of you that have seen this before, this may quite frankly just be boring to you, and you can just turn us off if you want to. But it's great, great learning. Now, you just take let's use our ruler. Go down from the corner of your building to the vanishing point. Just make a very light dotted line. Very, very light. See, like that. Then go to the bottom of the building, like this. Make another very light dotted line. Now that's the perspective side of the building because we're standing right in front, square facing the building. So this side is not perspected, okay? But this side is perspected because we're not looking at it straight on. So in an effort to see what's over here, doesn't matter how long you make the building, but please remember now that you don't want a building that's going to go all the way back to the horizon line because that means it may be several miles long. So let's just say we're looking at a photograph and our building appears to be about this wide. All right, so you draw a line down in between the two vanishing lines. Okay, the lines that go right back to your point. Then you go ahead and you just darken it in. And now you have a perfectly perspected building in terms of the side and, now we can add the roof line and some doors and some windows and everything will line up. Now the reason I like to show this is because I have studied so many paintings over the years where I've seen some of you try to put barns and buildings and houses and outhouses and everything else, and so much of the time they look like they're falling down the hill, or it looks like you've got a ground level view and you've got an aerial view at the same time because you've got all your lines backwards. I'm going to give you some rules. In perspective, doesn't matter if it's 1 point or 2 point. Now everyone get this down. All opposite non-perspected lines are parallel with each other. Okay? Please keep this in mind. This line that's going vertical, this line, and this line, if they go forever, they'll never touch each other. Those are parallel lines, and they're opposite to each other, see? So they're going to be parallel with the sides of your canvas. So please remember the rule. All opposite non-perspective lines are parallel with each other. Now, with that in mind, you're going to be able to have a building that's standing up instead of angled. So whenever you draw a building, check the sides of your canvas and make sure that your lines are parallel with your canvas, and your building will stand up properly. Now, that doesn't solve the perspective problem, but what it does do is it helps your building to stand up. Now, the next thing you do is you find the center of your building here. You put a little dot if you want to, and you go ahead and run another parallel line, sort of up this direction. Okay? And you put a little dot wherever you want the height of your roof to be. Now, it doesn't really matter to me how tall you make. You don't want to make it out of hand here. I think I'll put my dot right about there. Okay? Now, because this is the non-perspective side, the front of the building, you go ahead and connect the two sides like this. All right? You can't really mess that up because if you get it in the center and you just connect the two ends, it's like connect the dots, okay? That's all you have to do. Now, to get the perspective side to your roof, and this is where most people go wrong. Now, a lot of times you get at this point without using anything but, the naked eye. You can do a lot of this. But here's what happens to a lot of us. We put the second roof line on, and then our roof line, we got one line going up, one going down, and going different directions. And that's how you get that sort of half aerial view and half ground view or whatever, and it's always distorted. All right? So the real reason for having a little bit of perspective here, we're not going to cover this extensively, but just enough to get you out of hot water. Go from the point at the top of the roof there down to your vanishing point with another dotted line. Okay? Now that will give you the proper angle of the perspective side of the roof. Now you got another dilemma. Well, how do I get the end over here? Well, that's really quite simple. Remember, you're talking about an opposite line, and all opposite lines are parallel. So if you've got the other roof line opposite this one, you don't want this line going up this way. You don't want it going too far that way. It has to be parallel with it. So how do you get it parallel? Well, really, you've created a parallelogram, and if you've learned that from some of your early math things, you'll understand that you've got to get this line parallel to this line, and sometimes you just sort of have to ad-lib to do it, but it's really not that difficult. Just eyeball it. See, this line and this line are parallel. Then you now can darken in this, and there you have the perfectly perspective roof line that goes with the side, and your building now is in place, and it looks like it fits the way it should. Now, adding doors, windows, and other little things like that, you can do the same thing. You can add fences and posts and all kind of things. For instance, say I want to add a fence going back there, and I've decided that I want it to be kind of in line with my building. Well, all you do is you get the height of your first post, which would say right there, okay? Any additional object that you add that's on the same plane, so to speak, of the building, you're going to use the same vanishing point, okay? So say I want a row of fences going back there. I put a little dot at the top. I go ahead and put a vanishing point. Now see, by the way, it went a little above the horizon line. Doesn't matter. It's going to have its own set of lines. Okay? Even though it's slightly above, then all you do is you put your posts in between each one of those lines. And remember the rule I just spoke to you about. One of the things that creates depth in a painting, other than the value system, is perspective. And as things recede into the distance, they do what? They get less intense in color for sure, or value, but they get shorter and closer together, okay? And then when you add the third thing of changing the value system, all of a sudden you've created instant depth, and they just disappear, okay? So now those are in perspective to the building. Now what if I wanted to add a window or a door, all right? Well, you always, first of all, establish the object that's farthest away from the point first, not the closest object. For instance, if I want to put a door here, and maybe there's a window, Always start with the door first, and say the door is this height. All you have to establish is the height of the door and put one line, just like you did on the fence row. Then you perspect the top of the door down to your vanishing point. Okay? Now you decide how wide your door is by looking at your subject material, because when a building is turned sideways, it's going to appear to be smaller because of the angle, because it's perspected, all right? If you're looking straight on, for instance, this door here, say I put a door here, this door, this same door put on the side right here will appear to be about like that, much narrower, okay? The same thing with a window. Say there were a window here. That same window over here would appear to be much narrower. So keep in mind that everything that's on the perspective side, because of the angle, will create a much narrower look because the lines are closer together, which gives us the rule that as things recede into the distance, they get closer together and shorter. So see, as you recede into the distance, even though it's a short distance, you're still receding, and this window, you get the height of it, okay? Then you perspect the bottom of it to the point, and we don't have a whole lot of room to work with here, but your window will be very narrow, and it's perspected there and there. And that's how you get the perspected side of your building so that it looks proper, okay? Now, do you understand what we're talking about there? This is a very important but very basic, very simple part of composition. And you use this mostly when you're having a hard time trying to make your building stand up, trying to get all of your roof lines on correctly, trying to get everything done. For instance, if you wanted to add a chimney, okay, how in the world would you put a chimney on here? Well, now this is going to be a little exaggerated, but all you do is you just start with the front of it here, okay? And remember, the front of the building was a square or a rectangle. You do the same thing on the chimney. You go ahead and put the front line, and you go ahead and follow the angle of the roof right there, you see. You make a sort of a rectangle shape here. That's the front of the chimney, and it's facing you, so there's nothing perspected there. But you perspect the side of the chimney by going from the top of that corner to the bottom of the corner, and then you follow the same rule that you followed for the rest of this perspective line. You decide how wide you want it to be. You know, it could be as wide as the house, but that'd look pretty stupid. So get this line right here, and you go to the top of the line, the vanishing line, to the bottom vanishing line, and there you have your chimney that's perfectly perspected and in line with the rest of the building. Does that make sense to you? Now that's really exciting, because all of a sudden now your building is standing up and it's perspected correctly. You don't have to worry about it falling down anymore. Another thing, I've seen people try to put wood siding or logs or bricks or shingles on their roof, and they just create the biggest mess because they don't get their lines correct. Okay, say I just wanted to put some wood slats on here, all right? All I have to do is put little dots like this. The width of each board, and each one, and I don't know how wide they are, it's just up to you. Or maybe they're going to be bricks. But you just put a row of dots on the corner. Then all you have to do is go from that dot down to your vanishing point and watch this happen. Now, if you're using a pencil, folks, like I mentioned earlier on, if you want to use a pencil, you'll have a lot better luck at creating this. So you go between the doors and windows. Now see, as I get below the horizon line, what happens? Your lines begin to go up. Isn't that exciting? One of the most exciting things is when you finally get grasp something and it works for you. Now, of course, you want to eliminate and erase all of these guidelines, and all of a sudden you have a building that you can make logs out of, or just wooden slats, or maybe bricks, and you just put your horizontal lines, your parallel lines, and you can make bricks out of it. You can make anything. Do the same thing on your roof. If you want shingles, you just put little dots, run your lines down there, and that creates the exact perspective angle that you need to have to add anything that you want to your building, okay? I just think this is incredible. One of the most exciting things about perspective is all of a sudden now you can make an object stand up correctly. What if you had an object, though, that was up on a hillside and you're struggling with it? Well, quite frankly, if you're looking up at something and you're way below it, it's still got to be perspected. All right, say in your particular painting, you have a hillside over here, okay? You're still going to have the same vanishing point, or a vanishing point somewhere on the line that's conducive to the angle of your building, but over here it may be sitting on the hillside, which in effect makes it above the horizon line. So don't be afraid to do your building from another location, all right? And then all you would do is just perspect it this way. So see, I'm on the other side of the vanishing point now. And you need to go ahead and perspect it, although you probably won't see the bottom of it because the hill's there, and you wouldn't want to see the bottom of it. But because your hill is covering up part of the actual perspective side of the building, you won't see the whole thing, but you still need to go ahead and draw it down there, and then your hill, see, goes in front of it. But that's how I went ahead and was able to get my building sitting on the hill perspected correctly, at least the top line, because I was able to follow the vanishing point with my vanishing lines, and I created that side. And you follow the same principle here. Doors and windows or a roof. Put a roof here, a little dot. Now, this is kind of interesting. You never know how it's going to come out. That's why doing it correctly, it's going to be right. It may seem odd to you, but look at this. Because the roof line is so high, we're looking up, it's going to be a very thin roof. But you still have to do this. All right? You'll see very little of the side of that roof right there, but it's there. And then you put a parallel line in conjunction with this one, the opposite. And even though it's a small section, I'll go ahead and shade it in so you can see it. There it is. And it's perspected correctly. There's the house on the hill that you were trying to sketch but never could figure out how to make it work. All right? So, folks, whenever you're using one-point perspective, your building can be on either side of the point, depending on what side you want to show perspective. It doesn't really matter. It can be on this side. It can be on this side. It could be sitting right on the horizon line. It can be sitting above the horizon line, and it could be sitting below the horizon line. But I think for the purpose of not confusing you, I'm not going to give you too much information about what happens when you put a point below the horizon, or an object, because that creates that aerial view, or the view from way on top of a mountain looking way down into a valley. And frankly, that's something that's rarely used in landscape painting. That type of perspective is more geared towards your architects and engineers, and when you get really far advanced up into some higher, techniques of painting. So for the most part, you're almost exclusively going to use one-point perspective with the point here either below the horizon line here, on the horizon line, or above it, but not with the whole thing below it, okay? So that's important. Now, one of the other things I want to talk to you about, say you wanted to add another object on the opposite side of this vanishing point. For instance, this could be a dirt road going off into the distance, okay? Just like this, all right? And this is just a dirt road, and you wanted to have a fence row running down the side of the road here. Well, that's fairly easy to do, folks. All you have to do is find where your first post goes and get the height of it and be sure that it's correct. In other words, we're going to talk about planes in our next session in relation to proportioning things, but you want to get your fence post, your first one, in relation to the building. And in other words, if you were to draw a line straight across here, and you put a fence post there, if this fence post were this high, now I'm just showing you some bad things that happen. Take your finger, measure, go right across this line, and take a look. That fence post is as big as the house. That's impossible, folks. You can't do that. I see that happen so often. All right, so here's the way you determine how the other objects are going to fall into place, at least from a perspective point of view, if they're on the same plane. Common sense is really your best teacher. I can't give you an exact formula because I know there is none. What you do is you take a look at your building, come over here, and you decide that your post is going to be about maybe a third as high as that building. And that's probably pretty close. Then you know you're about right. So you draw your first post. You draw a line down to your vanishing point, just like we've been doing. You go from the top to the bottom, okay? Now, let me say something to you here. Sometimes perspective is so perfect that it doesn't work for a painter, all right? In other words, it's mostly used as a guideline to get the basics, but there's so many little intricate things that get in the way, little humps and bumps, little curves in the ground, all kinds of things that will hide the exact line of your perspective. So when you perspective, see, it goes back into the distance. All right, don't be afraid not to put the post right down in the road. It should stay on the edge of the road, but it will follow the top line and go on back into the distance, okay? So as long as you understand that perspective is used only to give you guidelines to help getting things stood up properly and to keep them from falling over, you may have to make adjustments, just like on the hill here. Well, the hill's going to cover the bottom of it, so you're not going to see the bottom of it. That's what you want. Maybe the curve of the road is going to cover the bottom of a fence post. That's fine. Don't just make perspective so perfect that it becomes an architectural rendering instead of a fine artist painting, okay? Remember, perspective is just to aid you to keep things standing up, okay? Well, we got to stop now, folks. I'm sorry we have to leave right now. In our next session, we're going to cover two-point perspective and some other wonderful composition things. So God bless you. Stay inspired. Keep painting. We'll see you again real soon on another Inspiration of Painting. No matter if you're an oil painter or an acrylic painter, these are all the same basic rules. Doesn't matter if you're a watercolor painter or even a sculptor. All of the same basic rules fall in line for the use of space and all the things we've been talking about. Also, now remember that as we go along here, we're going to be talking about a lot of things here that you can apply not only to your painting, but you might just want to be a sketch artist. You might want to just learn to draw or work with pastel. Doesn't really matter, okay? So everything we cover here is for every type of medium and every type of subject, every type of surface you paint on, so it doesn't leave anyone out. Now, we've gone through and we've covered composition, design. We've covered the three types of composition, if you remember, the three kinds of triangles, the L shape, the center type. We've talked about negative space. We're talking about depth now by using perspective with 1 and 2 point, which is where we're going to be today, is on 2-point perspective. And then in the next session or two, we'll be wrapping up with a little bit about shadows, reflections, planes, and some information about basic drawing. Now, I want to say something about that before we go any further, because the question has come up many times. Do I have to know how to draw to be a painter? I would say this. If you were looking at being a top-notch professional artist, trying to make a full-time career as a painter, I think drawing is a necessity. I have many, many people call from all over the country by the thousands wanting to know if we'll furnish patterns for our work. Well, because I am more into teaching how to do all of these things, I don't furnish patterns, so that's why I hope that this particular segment and the ones in the past and the ones we're doing in the next few sessions will help you, because I want you to learn to be your own sketch artist. So you don't need to learn to draw too well to be a painter, and just have fun with it and be sort of into the therapeutic aspect of it. But if you're going to take it too much further than that, I would recommend that you have a good drawing course, and there's a couple places you can get that. Number one, you can go to your local college or art school. You can go to, and my recommendation is find a real good, solid teacher in your community that knows about basic drawing, and just take some lessons and learn some basic techniques, because that's what will help you get over the hump on some of the areas where you're having some struggles, okay? So when we get to basic drawing, I'm only going to touch on it briefly because from that point on, there's so many different ways you can approach drawing, and I'll just give you some rough ideas how you can get started, and we'll help improve your technique, and then go find you a private teacher in your community, or maybe someday we'll join up together in one of our art classes. All right, now, we left off last time talking about one-point perspective and how you create depth by using a vanishing point, a horizon line, and how to perspect the one side of your building. Now, on two-point perspective, it's a little different ball game. So let's flip to a clean sheet here. And if you're following along or making some of these examples, it's probably a good idea to have a ruler or some kind of a straight edge to make some lines. And a pencil is better than charcoal because this makes a fat line, but it shows up better for the program. Now, let's start up again here with another, what we call the horizon line. This will be two-point perspective. Okay, I just put 2 point there. Now let's put a vanishing point, say, sort of in the middle here. Yeah, there, and maybe, say, one right about there. Okay, so 2 point perspective simply means you're going to have two vanishing points because both sides of your object is going to be perspected. All right, so when you're looking at a perspected object where you got two sides, instead of drawing, let me just recap this so you understand. Now remember, when you did 1 point perspective, you didn't have to perspect this side because you're facing it straight on. So it's easy to just draw it all parallel lines. But when you're looking at 2 point perspective, you're standing at the corner of a building and all you see is the corner here, and you have to perspect this side and this side. So this will help you in a couple of areas, and I'll go ahead and show you one of them. In fact, I think I'll make my point over a little further so I have a little more room to work here. Remember, these are called the vanishing points, so you can make VP there if you want. This line is called the horizon line, so we'll put HL there. It's where your sky and your ground, they eventually merge, and that's where your eye creates this even, level line, okay, when you see these things merge together. Now, to create an object, and let's use a windmill, for instance, okay? It's a pretty simple structure, but it really helps get the point across so that you can use it for other buildings and other structures. All right, just start, first of all, with a straight line. Now, this line should be fairly parallel. Let me get right in the way here and draw a line. Now, I'm going to put most of it above the horizon and a little bit below. See, it doesn't really matter. You can have more of it here or more of it there, or it could even be standing on the line. Doesn't really matter where you put it. Now we're going to perspect this side and this side. So how in the world do you do that? Coming from the Midwest, I guess, is one of my favorite things because early on in my career, I did a lot of windmills, of course, as most of us have. Did a lot of outhouses, which was one of my biggest sellers, and they all had to have certain perspective to make them work, okay? Well, I didn't really want to make a career painting outhouses, so I went into doing other things, and here's how we perspect windmills. You go ahead and go from the top of your corner of your item or your object, make a little dotted line, which you will erase later. And by the way, if you're using your pencil, make a very light line so that you can erase it easily, or especially if it's on a finished project. Then you go to the bottom of your object, okay? Then you do the same thing to the other side. And by the way, these points can be closer to your object. They can be further away. It just depends on how wide the object is, how much of it you want to be seen on that side. In this case, they're about the same. This one's a little further out than this one, so that's okay. But just for the sake of showing you the basic concept, this is what we're going to do here. Okay, you put the little dotted lines, and then we're going to have some fun. All right. Now, how in the world are you going to make something out of that? Well, just like on the 1 point perspective, now what you do is you decide how wide your windmill really is. You know, some of them have a wide base, some are a little narrower, and depending on the subject you're working from, it has a lot to do with it. Well, in this case, I'm going to go ahead with my side here, about like that, and this one I'll make just a little narrower, okay? So I put a dot there and a dot there, and then I come up here, and remember that a windmill is on a tripod or an oil derrick. I also have painted lots of oil derricks coming from the Midwest. But anyway, you put a little dot up here that's a little closer. so that you'll know there's going to be a tripod shape and one right there. Now those are stationary lines that don't need perspective. Because they're on a tripod, they're not parallel, so you can't really compare them to anything else. So you go ahead and draw now. You're going right to the top of your vanishing line there. Don't go above it or below it. You go right to it, see? And as long as you stay within the lines, as long as you stay within your vanishing lines, everything will be perspected properly, okay? Now fill in this little one here so that you can see the top of it. You don't have to do the bottom because that's just an open tripod there. Now what about the leg in the back? A lot of people say, well, how do I find that leg? Well, that's not too difficult. All you do is go from the corner of this leg. You may not even see it. It may be right behind that one, so I'm not sure. Let's find out. Put a line there. And it is. It's right behind it. So we're not going to see the other leg, all right? Normally, if these weren't too spaced evenly, or if this were set back a little further or whatever, you would have seen the other leg. Wherever these points cross, that's where the other leg would be positioned, okay? Well, in this case, it's directly behind this leg, so you won't see it. So we've saved ourselves a little work. That's fine. Now, here's the fun part about perspecting something that's done in two-point perspective. I'm going to put the supports that go this way, and all you have to do here is decide how many supports you're going to have. In this case, I'm going to have maybe 3. So I put 3 dots, or maybe 4. 3 above and 1 below. Okay? And all you have to do, folks, is go from that dot down to this vanishing point. And if you don't want to put the dots, that's fine. If you just are lined up there, just go ahead and draw your line. That saves you a little work later. Then do this one. And then do this one. See, as long as you're lined up with your vanishing point, you'll be okay. Now, see, you're below the horizon line. So your line now goes up to your vanishing point. Now you can start down here or up, doesn't matter where you start because it's all going to come out the same. Okay, there's that one. There's this one. This one. And this one. Now, you see we have perfectly perspected our object. Now, the next question, someone says, well, it looks too perfect. Well, it is too perfect. That's the whole point behind perspective. It's generally, it's a tool that architects and engineers and other people that need to get perfect renderings. But as artists, all we use it for is a basic guideline to get our objects in their proper location. Then we tear them apart. For instance, at this point, I know that it's standing properly. Now it's time to make it look like an old windmill. So what you would do at this point, if you did want one of these to be hanging up there just perfect, you can angle it, you can make it broken down, you can make your post a little wiggly or a little bit crooked. It's okay as long as the basic structure is perspected properly. It'll look like it's standing up instead of leaning off or falling off the canvas. Now, you put your cross braces on just simply by doing this. And all you have to do is go from corner to corner. And because you have properly perspected both sides of your object, whether it be a building or whatever, you now have a well-balanced, perspected object that looks like it fits whatever. Now, again, if you want to add a fence here, you can do that. In fact, if you want to put the fence way up here, you can do that. For instance, all you have to do is decide, you can go ahead and run your vanishing line way down here, if you would like. And as long as your fence is on that same line, okay, you go ahead and draw your post, say, about right here, for instance. And you come back here, you put your vanishing line, and you add your posts, and as they recede into the distance, see, they get closer together, a little bit shorter, and then as they go back into the distance, they just disappear. So see, everything, as long as you stay within your vanishing lines, and if it's on the same line there, they'll be perfectly perspected. Now, you can move around. You can put another object over here that's perspected, okay? If you just want to, it doesn't really matter how many objects you put in there, okay? As long as you understand the basic principles to 1 and 2 point perspective, it'll get you out of a world of hot water, okay? Very, very exciting. Now, let me give you a real brief idea how a building kind of comes into play here so that you won't get confused, because that's generally the item that we need to learn is how to do the buildings. All right, let's have another vanishing line, or a horizon line, I mean. The vanishing point here, the vanishing point, say, over here, and it's not uncommon if you have a building here where it looks like your vanishing point's way over here. You may have to add an additional piece of paper just to get the lines in there, okay? But for the sake of teaching this, I'll go ahead and put the points within the canvas. Now, let's put our building right here. Now, I'm just going to show you a little different. See, I can make it just barely below, or I can make it way down here. Let's just make it a little below, but perhaps a little taller. Maybe it's a real tall building. You do the same thing now that you just did on your windmill, except that instead of making a tripod out of it, we will make a building. All right, now here's what you have to do. You have to say, perhaps you're standing on the corner of a street and you got a building here and you got buildings here and you're looking at this corner building, or maybe it's an old house or something where you're standing on the corner of it. Now all you do is decide how much of this you see in your vision. You put a dot there and you make a parallel line. Now remember, the rule for this is all opposite non-perspected lines. It doesn't matter if it's 1 point or 2 point perspective. All opposite non-perspected lines are parallel with each other. So this line, and the next line. Now let's make this one a little narrower, just because we're going to make the building kind of look a little different. All right. As long as I stay within my vanishing lines, your building will stay perfectly perspected. Now, you see how interesting that is, folks? It's incredible what you can do with this if you just have a little common knowledge of what perspective is. And then all you have to do is decide where your windows and doors go. For instance, if you want to have a door over here, remember the rule. You always put the object farthest away from the point first, and you get the height of it based on how it should be proportioned to whatever it is you're doing. In this case, this could be a 2-story house or one, doesn't really matter. Then you just perspect the top of it. And then you decide how wide it is by looking at your reference material. And there's your door, perspected just right. Same thing over here. Let's just say we want a window over here, and we want to have it right, say it's a little lower or a little higher. Let's go higher. You get a dot there, you get the height of your window first, but it's the object or the subject furthest away from this point. So each point you have to treat separately. So you put your door here. If you're perspecting this side, it's the farthest object. Here it's the window up here, so you get the height of your window, whatever height you want it. You perspect it like this. Then you decide how wide the window is going to be. And it's a non-perspected parallel line. So now you have a high window. You can put a low window here just by perspecting it. You can put a high window there. And before you know it, folks, you have a perfectly perspected building that has all of the basic components that make it look like it's standing up. Now remember when we talked about 1 point perspective and setting your object up on the hill? The same thing applies for 2 point perspective. If you want to perspect an object on a hill, you do the same basic principle. You have your hill. Let's just run another horizon line here right quick. And just for the sake of time, I don't want to get too involved in this, but say you have a hill here, and you want to have your object right there. Well, you perspect to the bottom of your object, down to those 2 points, and whatever is still showing above the hill, you go ahead and put your lines, but they have to be in line with, your vanishing lines. And you erase them, and there's the top of your building, standing on top of this hill, so it looks like you're looking up at it. That's how you get that downward look up. Now, again, we don't normally want to apply this to an aerial view because 99.9% of you are not into that. You're not going to be doing a lot of buildings from an aerial view or from a mountaintop looking down on something. That's fairly complicated and takes a lot more instruction, okay? So let's think about perspective for what it is. It's a way to create depth in your painting. It helps you get a little bit more stability to your buildings because, frankly, folks, so many of you, when you do buildings without a little knowledge, your buildings really ruin your painting because they're not in the proper position. They don't stand up correctly, okay? Now, if you have any questions about that, don't hesitate to give us a call. We'll try to send some literature to you or help you any way that we can about what composition is all about. Or maybe someday we can join up together in an art class and I can talk to you about it personally. But as long as you don't complicate the points, the matter, you're going to do okay? It'll help you a lot. Now let's go back and talk about where we've been and where we're going to be headed now. To create depth, we had to go through 1 and 2 point perspective. That in itself, right there, has a lot to do with composition. Now we're going to go down and start talking about some of the other very important aspects of composition that will really pull your whole thought process about painting together. Now, let's move very cautiously, though, because once you get past this complicated, sort of confusing perspective thing, you can open up your mind here, but sometimes you're a little confused. So let's just think a little bit about what we're going to do here. Let's talk first about planes. Now, we're not talking about airplanes, the kind that you fly around in. We're talking about lines, okay? We're talking about lines that create flatness. And this is how you learn to proportion something, and it's in direct relationship to perspective in many, many ways. Okay, let me give you a couple of examples here. First of all, let's take this painting, for instance, and I like to use some of my own work as examples to kind of help you see a little better what a finished piece looks like. Whoops. Okay. Now then, every single thing or object in your painting is sitting on its own, what we call a plane, P-L-A-N-E. For instance, this layer of mountains, if I were to draw a line back there, you would have a plane. This layer of mountains, if I drew a straight line, it has its own plane. This layer is sitting on a plane. This layer, every little object, and there may be a million planes in any one particular painting. They're all parallel to the top and the bottom of your canvas, but every item sits on a plane. Now, I guess you can get a little bit frustrated with me here and say, well, what in the world is a plane all about, and why are you telling us about that? Here's what it's all about. Once again, as I travel and teach, I guess one of the funniest things that I see are so many proportion problems. We'll have a tree, or we'll have a building, we'll have an animal, and you'll have something in relation to it perhaps on the other side of the canvas that is so far out of proportion, it looks like the Jolly Green Giant in comparison to a little green mouse. You've got to understand that there are so many components to composition that will instantly clear up these problems, and one of them is the use of planes. Now, let me just give you an example. Now, you may have gone along and painted this just fine and dandy, all right? And I've seen many, many people paint things like this, and then they want to start adding their subjects or their center of interest or their objects. Let's talk about that here. Now, remember, I'm going to use charcoal here, and it'll erase off of this canvas, so don't panic. I've had a lot of people call and say, oh, you ruined your painting, you ruined your painting. Remember, charcoal is what you use to sketch, because all you got to do is take a damp paper towel, and it comes right off. Or you can even take a bottle like this, if it's a dry canvas, and you can just mist it with a little water and clean it right off, okay? So you can't really hurt this unless you're using a real hard charcoal and you dig into it and it kind of stains it a little bit. But a soft fine charcoal will not hurt it a bit. All right, now here's an example. What if I wanted to put say, a little building or a cabin sitting back in this painting somewhere. All right, well, for the most part, a lot of us don't have a whole lot of problem drawing the building once we understand the perspective. But we put it in here, and for some reason or another, we might get it too big. All right, let's just draw it, see what happens. All right, there's my building. I've drawn the building now. When you're done with it, you go ahead and draw a line parallel, okay, like this, all the way across your canvas. Now, this could be anything. This could be a building, it could be a person, it could be a fence. Whatever you're adding to your painting, go ahead and sketch it, then put a line, and here's the key thing about plane. This is what I want to talk to you about. Everything that is sitting on this plane, okay, all the way across, must be in direct proportion to the other objects on that plane. Now, there's no magic formula for this, folks. It's a common sense rule. You see, in painting, we have what we call the common sense rule. Mother Nature is your teacher. You go out and see things, all right? Well, in relation to this bush, if I have this line across here, all right, and this is a fairly large house or a cabin, this bush looks awful big in comparison because it's sitting on the same plane. Now, doesn't this house look a little bit too small in comparison to where it's located? Now, what if I were to even go in here and put a, let's say I wanted to put maybe a little, a person standing in here. Okay, well, I've seen a lot of people go ahead and draw their person in here. We'll just kind of use it and setting on that plane there. Maybe there's an Indian out here in the prairie herding some sheep. Well, you may have done a beautiful job drawing in that person, but look what happens, folks, when you run that person across this plane on this line. He's as tall as the house. He may look real fine out of context, but when it's back in relationship to the other objects on that plane, he's too big. So what do you have to do? You adjust. You make it smaller or bigger, or maybe it's just perfect. You run this person right on across over here, and all of a sudden, he is out of proportion to this bush, okay? So what happens when you get into this? The first thing you do is adjust your house. We make the house either bigger or smaller, or if we want this size house in there, we put it back on a plane that's in proportion to something else. Maybe this tree. Look at this building by taking the height of it. There we go. That'd be just about right. That tree and this house should be together. So if I want this house to be in here, I would probably want to put it setting back here in the distance, maybe angle it a different direction. And in proportion to this tree, it's about the right height. And the only way you're going to know that is by studying Mother Nature, okay? Well, because we're just about out of time, folks, we're going to pick up a little bit more on this probably in our next session, continue on with some basic drawing, how to put shadows and reflections in your painting. We'll touch a little bit on color theory, but not too much because we're not going to have a whole lot of time for that. So God bless you. Stay inspired. Keep painting, and we're going to see you again real soon on another Inspiration of Painting.
Professional staff will help find art supplies suitable for your needs, including Winsor & Newton's Artist Materials. And by the Friends of Seven.
The Inspiration of Painting with Jerry Arnell is brought to you in part through funding provided by Grumbacher, fine artist materials since 1905. Grumbacher paints, brushes, and other supplies designed to bring out the creativity in you.
Hi, welcome to the Inspiration of Painting. I'm glad you could join us again today. are again, back in the studio, working on composition, design, and perspective. I really hope you've been enjoying the last few sessions. We have a couple more, and we'll kind of wrap up some of this and get back to some of the fun stuff. I know painting is everyone's favorite thing to do and throwing on color. But you know, folks, really and truly, getting on a serious note here, if you really want to learn to be a good painter, and I don't mean you have to be a professional artist or an advanced painter by any means, but even if you're doing it for therapeutic reasons, you'll find it a lot more enjoyable if you have a good basic foundation for how to put your painting all together. See, we're living in such a fast-paced, push-button world. We're wanting to do everything in just a few minutes, and that's not the true nature of what painting is all about. Not to say that there's not a place for that in some forms of it, but if you really want to get a handle on how to be a painter, you've got to have some good grounding and some good foundation. Just like building a house. Without a good foundation, the house isn't going to stand. So that's what we're going to learn, is how to do our foundation. So whether you're an acrylic painter, an oil painter, watercolor painter, a sculptor, whatever medium you're working with, these lessons that we've been doing the last few weeks and the next couple of weeks are imperative for you to be a good artist. All right, now, we left off last time, if you'll remember, talking about 1 and 2 point perspective, and we ended up at the very last show talking about planes and discussing how to proportion things when you have a plane. Now, we were using an example of another painting of a desert scene with some mountains. Here we're going to actually use some objects, things that really have form and shape. Now, I want you to notice something here. Every object that's out here, doesn't matter if it's a weed, the truck, or the cows, or whatever it is, are on their own plane. Now, I have found out that so many of us just don't understand what planes are all about. Okay, watch what happens quickly here as we put the planes in place and we start proportioning things. Okay, give you an example. You see these fence posts here? Every one of these posts have their own plane. If I draw a line straight across, parallel, across the canvas, that post is on a plane, okay, all the way across. Now, any object that's on that same plane with that post should be in direct proportion to each other. Okay, give you an example. I have a cow that's right here, this cow, and this is how I know if it's correct. It's standing almost right on the same plane that fence post is on. All right, so let's do a little test. Now, because it's so far apart, you can't really tell if that cow is proportioned properly. Now, remember what I told you. Mother Nature is your best teacher. So there's no real formula or, really, there is no formula for how the plane system works other than that everything that's on that plane must be in proportion to each other. And we both know, if you've gone out in the country, if you take this cow, let's run him over here, the same height that he is, and you put him right here, that's about the same proportion that he would be in real life, okay? Now, depending on the fence post, it could be a little taller, a little shorter. But most cows are just a little bit shorter or just about the same height as the second or fourth or fifth wire at the top of the post. I've seen this, and it depends on the cow. It could be a baby calf or if it's a big cow. But generally speaking, if you take the height of this cow and run it over here, you'll see he's just about to the top of that wire, and that's about how it should be. So by going out and studying, taking photographs of things, you can actually proportion things to where they're almost identical. Because a good example of this is, you see another thing, for instance, if you put this truck, let's draw a plane across here to the bottom of the wheels there, right on across. Alrighty. And by the way, don't panic. This is soft vine charcoal. Now this charcoal erases easily off of these paintings, so just a little damp paper towel and you can wipe it right off. So that's why I use it, because you can sketch on it and so forth. Now then, we have this truck that's sitting here, and there's a plane right here, and actually it's this post right here. So if you took this post and you came over here and you put it in proportion to this truck, you'll notice that the post is slightly higher than the bed of the truck. And I have been out and I have seen that in many, many occasions, and that's exactly correct. If you were to put a person standing here, for instance, if I took this gentleman, now he's on a different plane now, he's up a little bit, so his plane will be up here. But if you wanted to have a person standing in here in relation to this fence or this truck, now I know I'm about 6 foot high, and if I were to stand next to a fence post, and the fence post is anywhere from 4 to 5 feet, just depends, if I were to draw a person standing in here, it would definitely be a little taller than the fence posts. All right, so what you'll do here is this. You put your person in wherever, you draw a plane on that person, wherever that person is standing, and whatever object, whether it be a cow, a fence post, a truck, a building, that's on that same plane with that person, it should have the direct proportion to it. You know, a good example of that is if you have a house and you have a door. I see so many people put doors on houses that are so much smaller than the person that's trying to walk through them because they've made the door too small or the person too big or vice versa. And if you just use the plane theory, just draw a plane. See where this cow is standing? Okay? Draw a plane across here. That cow is on a plane. This cow is on a plane. If you take this cow, here's a good example also. Look how big this cow is in the foreground. Well, everything that gets in the foreground is going to be larger. So here's a good test to see if it is correct. If I took this cow in its full size and I put it back on the plane where this truck is, you'll be absolutely amazed the difference. So you'll know that it's correct. Watch. See how wide that is? Come back here on the plane where the cow is, and that cow is twice the size of that truck. Now, isn't that interesting? That means you've done it correctly, because everything as it comes forward gets a little bigger, and a little bigger until it becomes the most important part of the largest part of the painting. Now, if I were to bring this truck back here in proportion to this cow, all right, then we would have a plane. For instance, okay, we have let's see, the plane that cow is on is about right here. Now, I know for a fact that when I've gone out, and I used to work on farms and ranches, when I'm feeding these cows, you know, they're about this height. They're about the height of the back of that truck. Well, if I were going to put this truck up here, the first thing I would do is get the back of my truck sketched in here in relationship to this cow and making sure that cow is about the right height. So this truck, you see, would engulf the entire front of the painting. All right, of course, that would be a bad composition because it wouldn't work well and have everything in there. My point being here, folks, is if you're having a problem, and most of you do, I'm just being real honest with you, proportioning objects one to another, if you'll use the plane system, draw a plane on any object you're trying to draw, something else in relation to it, you'll correct the problem almost instantly. Common sense will tell you that you can't have a person this big standing right here on that plane, because if I took that person and put him over here in proportion, he only comes up to about midway to the cow, and everybody knows we're taller than a cow, okay? So unless you've got another reason for that person being very tiny, then you better get your proportion correct. And a lot of times that also eliminates some composition problems, because if you get things out of whack, too big or too small, it throws off the composition, and you've got to change, move things back, bring them closer. So there's a whole lot of things that will be very beneficial that you can do if you use the plane system, okay? Very simple, really, folks. If you take a little time to practice and play with it, I guarantee you'll get great benefits out of understanding planes. Now, it's customary for me at the end of all these little sessions to ask questions, and since I can't do that here, don't hesitate to give us a call or drop us a note. If we can do anything at all to help you, we will do that. All right. Now, let's set this aside. Now, we covered planes to some degree, all right? That just takes practice to really understand it. Now, remember, we also decided we're going to talk about shadows, reflections, and then we're going to discuss a little bit about color mixing and some of the things that finish out making your composition, because composition covers all of the things we've talked about in the last few sessions. All right? Now, after planes, in fact, we're done with that now, we're going to go down to another trouble area, and that's shadows. Now, this sounds awful basic. A lot of us just really and truly don't understand what shadows are. I have, again, been to many seminars around the country where I'll see people try to put shadows in a painting, and they'll get them, they're just so overpowering in the painting that just the whole thing falls apart. And the same thing about reflections. Reflections are another trouble area for people. So I'm going to give you some basic hints that will really help you improve your painting. Now, let's first talk about shadows, and there are two types of shadows. And I've got a real simple rendering here that will show these using one of the 4 basic shapes, which we also will talk about later on in a little bit of basic drawing. Now, if you want to think about this for a minute, there are 2 types of shadows. We have what we call a form shadow, which the form shadow is the shadow that creates the form to your object. Okay? That's what this shadow is. That's what this shadow is. That's what this shadow is. Then you have what you call your cast shadow. That's this shadow here. Now, someone always says, well, which one is the darkest one? Well, to be honest with you, I've read so many different pieces of literature about different artists' opinion of this, and this, and for a long time, I always thought that the darkest shadow was the shadow on the form, and that's not correct. The true darkest part of the shadow is the cast shadow. Let me tell you why. Stop and think about this for just a moment. A shadow, a form shadow, it still has light circulating around the object, okay? Because it's up in the air, it's got light, it's got light that's bouncing off of other objects. Sometimes we call that reflected light. It bounces back on the back side and creates a little sort of a halo or a little bit of a lighter area. And because this shadow is on the ground, on a solid surface, and light can't really penetrate that or circulate around it, that will, generally speaking, be the darkest part of your shadow. All right, so that's a good little rule to know. So you have 2 shadows, the form shadow that forms this, and the cast shadow that creates this part of the painting or your drawing. Doesn't matter what kind of object it is, okay? That's a shadow. Now, let me tell you a little bit more about shadows. There are some very interesting tips about shadows that I think you'll find really helpful. Number 1, I'll give you another rule, and I know I've been talking a lot these last few weeks, but you know what? You're going to have a whole library on things that are going to really help you. Shadows are not like reflections. Reflections are constant. They never change with the sun. But with shadows, they change with the direction of the sun. So this is how you add atmosphere, one of the things we talked about in our painting composition. So when you have a fence post, for instance, and you've got some light source, say, coming this direction, okay, the shadow is on the right-hand side. Now I want everyone to pay attention about another rule. Not only do they change with the direction of the sun, but shadows always follow the contour of the land, okay? Please write that down. Shadows always follow the contour of the land. Now let me show you an example. A lot of times we don't see that, and I think I might have a painting or two that will show you that here. I'll have to check. But say you have a little hillside here, maybe a road, and you've got a wash right here. Okay, just a little wash. And you've got another shadow here, and another post, and they're just going down like this. All right, here's one of the most important aspects of shadows that most people get wrong. Excuse me. When the shadow comes across, a lot of people do this. Is that right or wrong? Now, you can check some of your own paintings, and you're going to find out where you're making mistakes. The shadow cannot just go straight across, because part of it really, in effect, is just hanging in the air. You see, when a shadow is cast on a contouring part of the land, it's going to follow the shape of that. See, it's going to come down into the ditch, and then if it hits the flat part of the road, it will come out here into the flat part of the road. Now, isn't that exciting? Now you've created another interesting concept and a little bit better composition. So instead of it just floating in the air, it now follows the contour of the land. If it hits a rock in the middle of the road, what's going to happen? It's not going to go around the rock, around it. It's going to go over it. So the shadow will go over the rock. Then when it hits the ground again, it flattens back out. So it doesn't matter what the shadow hits. It's going to follow the contour of whatever object it's being cast on, whether it be a bank, a road, or for instance, say, now just for the sake of showing you this, if you had a solid wall right here, say a wall from a building, and this shadow hit there, it's going to go up the side of the building like this. Okay? Now, it's important for you to understand that every time it hits something, it's going to follow the angle of whatever object it's being cast on, whether it be a building or anything else. So that's a very, very important thing to remember. Another thing that's important to remember is that, in fact, I think one of the most, and I shouldn't say funny, but I have seen some really interesting things in the years I've been painting and teaching. And one of them is this. You may have a row of fence posts. Let's get these in here real quickly. And maybe they're going around this little curve on this particular road. Well, the sun's not going to change direction every time it hits a post. It's still in the same place. But because the sun is where it's at, it's going to do this. All right? A lot of people, as they go up, for some reason, just because it feels better, all of the shadows begin angling down. They may get the first one correct, but one important aspect here, folks, to remember is that every single shadow that's on the same, that's from the same sun is going to follow the same contour. For instance, here we have a shadow going to hit this little thing. When it hits the bottom of the road again, it's going to flatten back out, and I want to show you something. It's going to be what? Parallel. All of your shadows will be parallel with each other when they hit the flat part of the road. And now they may get closer together just simply based on the fact that there's, they're further back. Okay? Maybe this one here. Just because they get further back doesn't mean they start angling down. And that's what 90% of all of the students that I've taught do because they didn't have proper instruction. You see, folks, when you're done with these sessions, you've got so much information now. You can go back and correct paintings you've already worked on. You can go ahead and as you do new paintings now, you can stay out of hot water. It cuts down on frustration. So remember that your shadows are always going to be parallel with each other of a similar or like objects, okay, that have the same sun. Now, I'm not saying that because one's a little taller that they won't be different lengths from time to time depending on the object and the time of day, but they will all have the same basic layout in terms of their parallelness to each other, okay? Very, very important. Now, if you don't get that down right, it'll take a little practice, okay? Because sometimes our hand just automatically wants to go like this when it needs to be going parallel with the bottom of the canvas. So practice that and it'll keep you out of hot water. That's really all there is to shadows. Shadows are not that difficult, but you have to understand it and get them correctly. I do want to say this, though. So many people that I've spoken to over the years get shadows and reflections mixed up with each other. Now we're going to cover reflections. A little more complicated. Now we all know basically what a reflection is. It's something that's an object that's being reflected into a transparent thing like water or glass or mirror, or it actually creates a mirrored reflection. Well, let's talk about this. Now, we talked about shadows change with the direction of the sun, and they always follow the contour of the land. Now, the difference in reflections never change with the direction of the sun. They only change from where you are standing in relation to it. They are always constant. Okay, let me give you an example. Let's, again, just because for the sake of teaching it easily, have another fence post here. Let's have a puddle of water here. We'll make sure this is all water right here. Okay? Now, most of us have a tendency to just put reflections in, and let's go ahead and do a couple of them that are angled. Most of us have a tendency to put reflections in thinking they're shadows, and they are not shadows, okay? I have people actually put shadows out here thinking they're reflections, or vice versa, and that's not true. Okay, you can put some shadows on the water, depending on the water, but it's a very rare when that happens. So let's just have our fence post going back into the distance now, and I'm going to show you some real neat little tricks for getting your reflections correct. Just draw you some real nice poles like this, and go back into the distance a little bit. All right, now this is the water's edge. Okay, now, because I'm facing these posts pretty much at eye level, and that's how most of you as beginners will place most of your objects. And by the way, please remember that these sessions are geared more for those of us that are learning basic techniques and in the middle, from intermediate to basic situation, okay? So that's where we're at here. Now, reflections are going to happen like this. You take your object and you measure the length of it. Now, these are basic ways of getting your reflection correct. You go from the bottom of the object, not to the edge of the water. Now, this is where most people make their mistake, okay? You get the length of your object, you go to the bottom of the object, and then you put a little dot down here, okay? That's where your reflection will end. Whether you're painting it, drawing, or whatever you're doing to it. Don't start the reflection from the edge of the water, but you start it from the edge or the end of your object, okay? If you start it from the water's edge, then it's going to be too long. There's a little space there that's missing, okay? That cuts off part of the reflection. Now, if that were water all the way up to there, that's a different story. See, if I wanted to, I could go ahead and do that if that were water, and you would still have the same length of a reflection, okay? But because there's a little piece of land between the water and your reflection, you're going to miss a section of it. Now, what happens when you have one that's bent a different direction? I hear this one a lot. A lot of times we say, well, let's see. If I have a reflection in the water or an object that's leaning above the water one direction, it goes the opposite direction in the water. Wrong. Reflections do never go the opposite direction. They always go the same direction, okay? So get that in your mind. Get the word opposite completely out of your mind. Let me give you an example. If your reflection is leaning to the right above the water, it's going to lean to the right in the water, okay? Now, go like this. You see, this is going to be missing, but I'm just going to show you here. Get your height, come down here, and put you a little dot. Now, then you come in here, and there's your reflection. Now, that wasn't so hard, was it? But here's what most of us do wrong. Sometimes we make our reflection way out like this, or way back like this. Folks, you can't do that and have a real effective painting. And I know right now some of you are saying, oh, I didn't even think of that. So you're going back, looking at your paintings, and you're seeing where you went wrong. Reflections were always going to follow the same direction of the object that's casting it, and you don't want to lean it too far. So how do you know if you've done it correctly? Well, if you want to really get serious about it, just take a straight edge and run a parallel line from the top of your object down like this. And if your two ends touch each other about in the same spot, you'll know you've got it leaned about the right direction, okay? That's very, very important. So you've leaned your reflection this away, and they're about in the same spot, so you've leaned it correctly. This next one, you measure it, go below, put a little dot, and you can see it's a little shorter. And here, you're just going to see a little dab of this one, and this one, you're not going to see it all. So you see how nice learning how to do reflections? It's not that difficult. However, where a lot of us have problems in this next section of reflections is getting the buildings and things. I'm going to give you a real quick example of how you lay a building in the water. Have the water's edge here. And let's draw our building first, okay? And let's just do it for the sake of learning. Let's draw a simple building with a roof like this. And let's put a little lean-to shed right there. How's that? Let me show you how you put the reflection of this building in here. Now, this is so simple, folks, and you can really have some fun with it. It's kind of like connect the dots. Now, you take everything just as you see it, just like I showed you in the other little section. Take the height of this first wall, go to the bottom of your building, not the edge of the water. Put a little dot down here. Okay? The next one, right below it, put a little dot. The next one, right below it, put a little dot. The next one, right below it, put a little dot. Now we've got a bunch of dots. What do we do with them? Well, first of all, go ahead and put the lines in, because these are all straight lines, so you can just kind of put them in like this. Okay, now what happens? You come in here and you find the length of your roof, okay? You go right to the bottom of your house, get this right, put a little dot right there. Now you connect this dot to this dot, this dot to this dot. Now you've got your roof in your front, then you just go ahead and put your cross line in there. That's automatic. This one's automatic. Then you come back here and you get this one and this one. So you got to go right straight down like this, right below it. You put that dot right there. Then you connect this dot to this dot, this dot to this dot, and you connect this line to wherever it comes right there. And that's how you reflect your house into the water and get it correct, just simply by following the little technique of measuring the length of the height of the building and starting at the bottom of your object and then placing it in the water. Now, let me give you a little bit of warning here. Whenever you put reflections in the water, now we're talking about painting here. I'm just showing you technical things, but always make the reflection a little bit lighter, a little softer in color, and a little less detailed than the actual object that you're trying to reflect. That gives it a lot more of a water-like quality, more reflective, okay? Same thing goes, folks. It doesn't matter if you're doing trees. Always go the same direction in the water, but always start at the base. And I promise you, when you're done with your reflections, they'll be perfect. Your shadows will be perfect if you follow the shadow rule. And again, you'll cut down on frustration. You'll be a happy painter again. Well, we have to go. God bless you. Stay inspired. Keep painting. We're going to see you one more time on composition here real soon. See you later.
Today's lesson and previous lessons are available.
And take it to the nth degree and make a living at it, you need to know how to draw very well. But just to learn to paint and have fun and use it as therapy and enjoy painting for what it's for, you don't have to be a great sketch artist. However, I think it's important that you have a very good understanding what it's all about. That's why we've been covering over the last few weeks all of these things about composition, design, perspective, and now we're going to do just a little bit about drawing so that you'll have a little more understanding of what's happening. Now, we've covered all these things. We've talked about the research, how to compose a painting. We've talked about the types of composition that there are. And we've also covered everything here. We've talked about negative space, design, perspective, 1 and 2 point perspective. We've covered shadows, reflections, how to put planes, I think, which is one of the most interesting parts of painting, is how to put a plane on a painting and get proportions. And now we're going to wrap up with a little basic drawing. Now, please remember, folks, it doesn't matter if you're an acrylic painter or an oil painter. All of this applies to everyone, okay? And these are only basics. All of these subjects can be taken to the nth degree, okay? Just depends on where you are and what you're trying to accomplish in your own career as an artist. So I recommend that in your local area that you find a teacher that's got the skills that are at the level where you want to be and work with that private teacher, or even go to a college art class or an art school if you can find one. Just start getting some good basic grounding and you'll be in good shape when you start painting. All right, now we're going to start in here with basic drawing. Now, because it's called basic drawing, that means simply one thing. It's very, very basic. It's very elementary. There's not a whole lot of elaboration we're going to do here on a lot of detail work, but I am going to show you the basics. And we start with the thing that they would teach you if you went to an art school, or if you were to go to a private instructor and they said, okay, we're going to hear your first lesson in drawing is this, the 4 basic shapes. Now, I want you to understand what the 4 basic shapes are. We have the sphere. Some people call it the circle, but it's not a circle, it's a sphere, because you can actually see all the way around it. So one of the first basic shapes is the sphere. And the second basic shape is the cylinder. Everything you draw in this entire world, in fact, I'm going to challenge you right now to begin looking at the things around you. Everything you draw or anything you paint, everything in the whole world is made up of some form of these 4 basic shapes. With the sphere, you can obviously see that there's endless things that will come out of those, or combinations of those. The same thing with the cylinder. In fact, they teach you when you're drawing people to use cylinder-like shapes to form the arms and the legs and the torso and the trunk, and for birds and animals too. And then you can connect some of these together to create basic shapes, and then you form your object. All right? Another one of the basic shapes that we work from is the cone, all right? Now the cone is a very interesting shape because you can do you can cut it off at certain points by creating these ovals and changing the length of it, the shape of it a little bit. But the cone is a very, very important shape that we use. And then finally, we have the cube, okay? Now, of course, the cube can be done in a lot of ways. You can see the top or the bottom, but the basic cube, or we call it a rectangle. A cube is perfectly square all the way around, and a rectangle is not. So a combination of the two, or one or the other, is fine for creating some of your basic shapes. Now, one of the things I want to talk to you about the basic shapes is this. Learning how to sketch or to draw, to create a form, is really quite simple, folks. Most of us make it really difficult, all right? Let me give you some little tips and some little hints for sketching. First of all, you're really better off if you use a soft piece of charcoal. Most of us use pencils, and I have nothing against pencils. I use pencils all the time. Or you have to use something, like a 2B or a 4B or a 6B pencil. It's got a softer lead, makes it a little easier. But something like charcoal or very soft pencil is great. And when you sketch, you want to sketch very loose. Now, it's kind of like so many of you I've taught in painting class. Most of us are real tense and real tight and real stiff. Sketching and learning how to draw requires a lot of flexibility, a lot of looseness, a lot of movement like this, okay? So when you're going to draw your sphere, it's a great subject to start with because off of that, you can look at any object down here on my work table. In fact, let's just have them close in down here for a second. You can take almost any object, in fact, every object on this work table, and you're going to see they're made up of one of these basic shapes. The paper cup, for instance, what shape is that? It's made up of the cone. Combination of the cone and the cylinder. These jars of gesso, made up from the cylinder. The can, the same way. The paper towel, we have another cup here. This roll of tape. The tubes, these are going to be from a cylinder, and then the end is from a cylinder. Okay, you've got your bottle here. This will be made up from your cylinder, okay, and parts of the sphere, and some of the other things, the cone, combination of things. Everything in life is made up of some of the very most basic shapes. Now, here's what I want to talk to you about. Whenever you're sketching, now I want you to watch this. I'm not going to go through all the basic shapes because I just showed them to you, but I'll do the sphere. Now, notice how I'm not even touching the canvas yet, or the paper. I take these 3 fingers and I kind of let them rest in there, and I sort of warm them up, you might say. And then I lightly touch the paper. See, I lightly touch the paper. You create a very, very light circle, okay? That's what sketching is all about. You see, there's a difference between sketching and drawing. Sketching is loose, rough lines to get your basic form. Then you can come back and detail it to finalize the drawing part of it, okay? Now, just to give you a brief idea what you can do with these shapes, which will be a lot of fun, is you can establish a light source by drawing a little arrow. And if you want to do a little shading just to practice, that's wonderful, especially, if you're a brand new painter. This is a great exercise. And in fact, all new students that I start with, if they haven't had any painting techniques before, I always start them out with this. You do a basic circle or a sphere, then you shade it. Take a piece of charcoal about 1 inch long, and you go ahead and you shade it right on the end. Now, folks, basic drawing takes on a whole lot of different things. We're talking about shading here, we're talking about different types of textures, but for the most part, I'm just going to show you some quick techniques that will kind of get you on your way. Now, we're going to also talk about shading and drawing in that there are 3 basic values. Now, there's a million values in between, but there are 3 basic values. You have the dark value, the middle value, and the light value. Now, you have to have all 3 of these to make your object look round. Excuse me. Now, if you start off real intense like this, lighten your pressure as you go across. Then you can take your finger or some blending instrument and you go ahead and little circular motions kind of soften these colors together, or this charcoal. Do not highlight or shade the outer edge. You just sort of let your eye finish the shape. So if you go underneath a little bit here, take your finger and sort of shade it. Rub it very, very, very aggressively. Get that nice and blended. Now you took what was just a simple circle and you've turned it into a three-dimensional object that you can pick up and feel and throw. You might want to throw it at me before this is all over. Then you add your shadow on the ground. This is your cast shadow. We talked about shadows pretty much at length last time. And so you sketch in your shadow. Now, of course, being on a flat surface, your shadow is going to take on the sort of the effect of an oval. And so you shade this in very quickly. And in fact, I want to tell you just a little bit about this. Anytime you take a round object and you turn it sideways, you're creating what we call an ellipse. You know, it's like a wagon wheel or a wheel, a tire. You know, in its full view, this tire or this wheel straight on looks, you know, like this. But when it's turned sideways, it suddenly becomes this. And this is called an ellipse. Whenever you turn a rounded object sideways, you're creating the ellipse, or the sort of a cutaway view of that, all right? That's just a term that you should write down and kind of remember because it's important. Now, after you've established the basic sketching technique, okay, I'm going to recommend a little homework assignment for you that you do lots of these circles, turning them into spheres with three-dimensional form by putting in the three values, dark, middle, and light, okay? Now, remember that value is important. We talked a little bit about values in some of the sessions on about how to create depth by adding lighter colors in the background. You also create roundness in an object by going from this value to this value to this value, three different values, okay? So that's the first basic thing in drawing. Now, I recommend that you take all four of the basic shapes, starting with the sphere. Then you can do the cone, and you can shade it. Put your shadow out here. Practice shading the cone. Do the same thing with the cube. Now, with the cube or the square or whatever you want to call this thing, you know, you can put the top and the bottom and the sides and have all four sides here. And what I recommend is that you have one side very, very dark, and you lighten your pressure, and you make this side just a little bit lighter, and then the top of it a little bit lighter. So you still have three values. It's just in the form of a cube, and that creates another blending technique that's really good, especially when you're learning how to do buildings and barns and things like that. All of these little exercises with charcoal will help you when you start painting, okay? And then, of course, you can do the cylinder. And if I were you, I would make the cylinder three-dimensional in that you can see the inside of the can, like a can, or a hollow log or whatever. Just go ahead and get your three values and really have some fun learning how to shade and to sketch and to draw all of these objects. And I promise you, after you've done several pages of these, you're going to be really, really much more relaxed and have a lot more confidence when you get ready to do some other things. All right, so that's the basic components to how you begin basic drawing. Now, I want to say something about charcoal. Charcoal, in my opinion, is the closest thing to paint that there is in terms of a hard drawing instrument. Because with charcoal, as you can see, you can put a little on and you can rub it and blend it very much like you can paint, and you can create those softer, more delicate shapes and forms that you can't get with some of the other hard drawing instruments, like harder, pencils and certain other things, pen and ink, where you have to do a lot of work to get to that point. So charcoal is a great medium to just play with, practice with, and learn how to create shading. All right? Now, let's talk about something else here when we talk about basic drawing. Now, we covered a few things in our last session our last few sessions about negative space. Now, I'm going to show something to you now that's really going to be very interesting. When you talk about basic drawing, we talk about form, okay? And here we have an actual object. Now, I've showed you this painting before, and you look at this bird, and I've had many of you send paintings and drawings you've done, and your birds and your animals are so far out of proportion. Well, what basic shape do you see here? Okay, you see your sphere, okay? Here you have another one, all right? Or you could call it part of the cone shape there, all right? Now, they take on different forms, keep in mind, but those are the basic shapes, and there are millions of different ways you can use those. So use this as our subject. I want you to watch what we're going to do here, okay? And then I want you to see how well this falls in the line. If I'm going to sketch this bird, I'm going to have him right here, and I'm going to start like this with sort of a big oval, which in a way is a takeoff from the cylinder, really, more than it is the sphere. And then I'm going to come up here with the head, and I'm just going to use some basic sketch techniques. See how light I'm sketching? This would be part of the cone. I have another cylinder here for the neck, and I have the oval shape for the body, and then, of course, the tail. You just sort of have to sketch in there as you see it, okay? It's also another elongated rectangle. Not rectangle. I can't even remember it now. Cylinder. Okay. So you've got a cylinder here. You have a cylinder here for the neck. You have a cone for the head, and you have your sphere, or perhaps it's called an oval for the body. All right. You get the basic sketch there, and then all you have to do is study what we call the negative space. Now, we talked about negative space in your drawing, in your paintings, but how do you apply it to actual basic drawing? Let me show you this. This is really exciting. I'm going to put this right here. Do this without this falling on. Okay. Now, I'm going to draw a straight line from the outer edge of this bird's head down to the tip of his tail. Let's knock this off. Okay. I'm going to draw one from the tip of his beak to the front of his breast, and anywhere there's an area where you can touch something and create impact. Now, even here where this tail is here, you can't really see too much. This is a piece of negative space, so it's already created, because you've got the edge of the canvas here, you've got the edge of the tree here and his tail, so this piece of negative space is there. But look at this. You've got this piece of negative space, a little one there, a little one here, a little one here, and of course this one here. Now, this is called the negative space rule in basic drawing. Most of us, when we draw shaping the form of our object with a line. Okay? That's natural. That's just human nature. That's what we think we should be doing. I have taught so many people these basic components, and finally when they understood that it's not that line that they should be looking at, but it's the space they leave that they should be looking at, then all of a sudden it's like a light bulb goes off in their head, and they realize, oh, I can do that. And sure enough, folks, it works. Now, here's the way I plan this. I always start off with just my rough sketch first. You got to start somewhere. So I just start with my basic sketch. All right? After I get my basic sketch, and I'm somewhat satisfied with the components of it, let's go ahead and get the beak in here, which is another sort of a cone shape. Get the breast there, neck there, tail there. And we've got this tree that comes out here and here. I just start sketching. Now, I'll look at that bird, and all of a sudden I'm going to say, okay, now how do I know if it's correct or not? Okay, I'm going to set my reference material aside for the moment, and I'm going to do the same thing to my drawing that I did to my reference material. I'm going to draw some lines here, and one here, one here. And, of course, I have the edge of the canvas here, which will have this piece of space, this piece of space, this piece of space, this piece of space, and this piece of space. We have 5 pieces of space here. They're called negative space. And now what I'm going to do is take my reference material, and I'm going to see how close I came, and then I can make my adjustments. Really quite simple. All right, let's just see. Now, I'm going to look at this space here that I've created, and I'm going to show you where you can have some other spaces if you need to break it down even further. But in this case, I'm going to look at this space, and I'm going to see how close I am to this space. You know what? We're not that far off. All right? But there's a couple of areas of weakness. If you look at the original space here, at this angle here, it left a very tiny spot right there. I've got a great big spot right there. All right? What do you think caused that? Well, it looks to me like what's happened here is that I've got my head too far up and not enough down, which throws this angle off, okay? So if I lower my head, you see, flatten the top out a little bit, like this, then I can lower this line, and then this line, see, will be lower. Then I'll come up with an almost identical space. You see, all you have to do, folks, is take your space, look at it, and adjust the little shapes of your edges of your body, whether it be a person, you know, when you do a figure, whether it be or an animal, you go ahead and draw the basic body in the way that you know best. Then you come back, if necessary, and unless you've had a lot of experience, and most of you haven't, that's why we use this rule, you come back and you make your adjustments to fit, and you draw your lines, okay? I'm looking here now, for instance. I'm a little concerned about part of my bird's neck, so I'm going to run this down here. See what kind of space I have here. Well, I have a lot wider space here than I have here. And this bird's got, so that makes him have a little bit too much of a skinny neck, okay? So automatically, so you can look at your drawing and say, oh, there's something wrong with it. But until now, you really didn't know how to fix it. Well, if you go back to the negative space rule of drawing, I guarantee you, by looking at space instead of your lines, you're going to learn to draw much faster and with a lot more success. Okay? So now what I do is I just basically fatten everything out here. Okay? And then I check my space again. I just keep checking my space until it's correct. All right? And yes, you are moving the lines out, but it's the space that you're trying to correct, okay? Once the space is correct, your drawing will be perfect. That's a guarantee. Now, let me say something, folks. There are technical ways of doing this. You can do a graph. You can do all kinds of things to make a drawing. But because we're living in the fast-paced world that we're living in, and almost everybody wants instant success, that is a technique that takes forever when you graph things and you put the numbers and you enlarge it that way. I have found out for those of us that want to just learn basic techniques that this negative space rule of sketching is really the best there is, okay? So don't panic. Just keep working at this until you have created all of the angles and everything is in place, and you will be a happy camper, okay? Now check this space here, and I'm pretty happy with that space for the most part. Pull the breast out a little bit there. I'm done here. Now this space right here, I got to duck down a little bit more, see? So I check my space here, pull my line up, and if you didn't see all those sketches, my space is about the same, okay? Now, one of the things that you want to think about here is when you come down here where you have no lines, use the canvas as the line, okay? So let's look at this section. All right, so here I have part of this tree coming out here and here, and here, here. So just check and see if you have a similar space. It's not as critical as the rest of these, unless the tail were hanging way down, which would create a bad look to the bird, then your space changes, okay? So you could tell if you have your sketch right by looking at the space, okay? You wouldn't want the tail hanging way down. You kind of want it back a little bit straighter, although I will say this, it looks like my tail here is angled out too much, so we want to angle this down just a little bit more. So your negative space here has the same general look, okay? We're not going to turn the tail down, we're just going to change the shape of the body to fit the sketch, okay? And that's how you begin to get a perfect duplication of an object. It's very simple. It may seem complicated right on the surface, but it's not. It's very, very simple. So we call this the negative space rule, put it to practice, and I guarantee you'll be able to use it for almost anything. It doesn't matter if you're trying to duplicate a tree, a person, or an animal. Negative space is what makes it work. Okay? Then you can have a lot of fun with it. Now, I'm going to label that. So once you've learned to get the light sketch down, get your basic shapes by using your basic forms, your basic 3 or 4 forms, you can draw anything you want to draw. There's no way you cannot make that work, okay? Now, I promised I would talk to you, and I'm going to just briefly go over this because some of you will get a little confused, but there's some little tests that you can do to help improve your drawing skill. I call it the ribbon test, the pressure test. There's a lot of other names for it. But I like to take a piece of charcoal and watch how we do this. These are called contour drawings. And contour drawing just simply means that you do the drawing quickly. You don't generally lift your charcoal back from the canvas or the paper. I teach this in all of my drawing classes because it really sharpens your skill. Take charcoal like this and start with the full pressure. Well, get my charcoal working. There we go. And watch how we quickly develop something. This will be a beautiful tree. Now, just by simply knowing how to place your charcoal on the canvas, you literally create all three values at the same time. Now, that's the main trunk. You create a little foreshortened view of this root coming towards you. That's called foreshortening. By making a continuation of little circles overlapping each other, you can make it look like something's coming forward. Now you want to attach a limb coming out. You just go in and begin the process of creating trees, bushes. You can create rocks and mountains. I just wanted to give you a brief idea how you can use charcoal to sharpen your drawing skills, which will in turn sharpen your painting skills. And I would prefer that you start with charcoal first and then pick up a brush at some point in time. You'll find you'll be a lot happier and a lot less frustrated. Okay? Isn't this exciting how you can just all of a sudden take a blank canvas and in just a few strokes, put a little knot hole there or something maybe. See, I don't even have to put the other side of the tree in there and we have a beautiful tree. All right? Just by twisting and turning. This is called the ribbon test. It's like this. If you want to practice it, you just turn your charcoal back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Learning to do different pressures, which creates sort of a ribbon-like effect. That's a wonderful, wonderful exercise, great homework assignment. So here's the way I'm going to leave it, folks. In basic drawing, all you have to remember is the 4 basic shapes, learning some basic shading techniques, use a light stroke, a lot of practice. And if you get down the negative space rule, see all these little pockets of space that are left between an object are called negative space. And if you learn how to fill those up properly by using all the composition things we learned over the last few sessions, you will no doubt improve your painting techniques and you will be a happy painter, okay? Well, we've got to go, folks. I'm really sorry to leave you, but next time we'll probably be doing some painting. So stay inspired. God bless you. Keep painting now, and we'll see you again real soon on another inspirational painting.
There's permanent rose, there's ultramarine, there's burnt umber, there's raw sienna, there's phthalo green, there's white, and there's vermilion hue. Those are the 8 colors. Now, we won't use the 8 for every picture, and we take away the ones we don't need. In this case, we're going to use 7 of the 8, so I don't need the vermilion. Let me put that away. We use the other 7. Next, we have the brushes. And we have 3. The first one it is the large, and this time it's hog's hair. Simply painting acrylic brush. It's 2 inches wide, and that's the fellow we're going to do most of the painting with. We have a mid-sized brush, which is about a number 4 filbert. That's a round-headed brush. And again, it's hog's hair. And the last brush is a small brush. It's very similar to the rigger that we use for watercolor. It's long-haired, it's nylon, and that's the third one. So those are the 3 brushes. Next, we have a palette. Once again, this is a plastic palette. And it's white, as you can see. There's a hole in it, as a matter of fact, for putting your thumb through if you want to hold it. But we're going to leave it flat on the table like that. And that's what we're going to mix the paint on. The next is a jar of water. Because, of course, with acrylic paint, luckily, you can use water to mix them. Then we have some cloths to dry the brush on. And now we come to the canvas panel. That's what it's called. It's 14 inches by 10. We're painting in landscape, the first one, because it's Mount Washington we're going to do. And as you can see, we've stuck it onto another board here so that I don't put paint on my nice table. That's the only reason. You can do the same. If you're painting at home, if you haven't got an easel, you don't need one. Put it down on a board like that, stick it on with masking tape, and then you won't damage it, and you'll see them paint marks around it. Anyway, that's a piece of useless information to start with. Having said that to you, let's look and see what we did. This is what we did at Mount Washington. Have a look at it. Well, it was, if you remember, it was the autumn, what we call the fall of the year in America. It was lovely. The colours were vibrant. They were beautiful. So you had all these reds and yellows and everything else. So we got a chance to do that. And how do we do it? We use the Have Some More Fun simply painting method. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean this. We start off with a horizon line, then we paint the sky, then we paint the middle ground, and last of all, we paint the foreground. That's the way we paint every picture. And in so doing, HSMF, we have some more fun. So let's go and have some more fun. First thing is, let's put out some paint so we can have some more fun. And let's take any colour we like, because I'm going to take the bit of blue here to one side. You'll see what I'm going to do in a minute. Squeeze out a lump of blue. And with that blue, and with my small brush, I'm going to draw the horizon line. Now, I can use the ruler. Now, the horizon line in this case is just under the mountains. So look, it's a swish across like that, that's all. That's all you do. Put it back there then. Keep your brush there and you're away. Now, it doesn't have to be dead on, because the funny thing about acrylics is it's a bit more forgiving than other mediums. And what I mean by that is you can go over it. You can paint one colour and then let it dry and paint another colour on top. It's just dead easy. Now I'm going to put out a couple of other colours, because we're going to paint this sky. Next, we're going to put out some raw sienna, which is a brown colour. Now, look, you see me putting the little top back on it. I tell you, there's a good reason for it. Because I, unfortunately, at one stage did not do that. And then I put my elbow down, and all the paint squeezed out all over the place. So put the top back on again. It'll stop it going hard as well. That's your first little tip for you. Now let's take these other paints to one side here. Let's throw the big brush into the water, do a bit of swishing around with them. Just get them wet. Now we're going to take up some white and some raw sienna. We're going to put a bit of a wash on here. Now, this time we have a slightly different way of painting as against the other medium. We scumble it on. Scumble. That's like kind of rubbing it backwards and forwards like that. See? Actually, I'm so adept at this. Look, I can actually do it not look. See, just all we're doing is covering the area of the sky with a browny coloured paint. Do you see that? That's all it is. And then I'm going to take some of the blue onto the brush without cleaning it. And I'm going to start adding in now sky. Now, before you do this, you look and see what kind of where you want the sky. See that? I'm putting in, the bit I'm putting in, of course, would represent the sky. The bit I'm leaving out is the clouds, isn't it? Because that's the white bit. Now, you'll get plenty of hairs falling out of this brush. This brush is brand new, never used before, taken straight out of the box, straight from stock. So it's no different. There's nothing special about the brush I use. People write in, they say, is that a special brush he has? No, it is not. Now, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to soften that. And what I'm going to do is, look, just drag the brush across ever so lightly, across the whole thing. Don't lean on it. If you do, you'll drag the paint with you. And that'll do for our sky. That's a sky completed. Not bad, was it? Now, you could dry that if you want. Or you can leave it there. I'm not going to bother drying it, but you can. This is the beauty of acrylic. They say, oh, it dries too quickly. No, it doesn't. I use the hairdryer on it to speed it up at times. Now, I'm going to put in Mount Washington. So let's all have a look at the Mount Washington, see what it looks like. Come on. It's a kind of a letter M, isn't it? We're lucky. You know that famous letter M of ours. So let's go up here a little bit. Now, if you find the colour is too vibrant, calm it down a bit. Look, that's just like that. I think it goes a bit roundy more that way, doesn't it? Back down. And then it goes up the big bit. It's the high part of the mountain, see it? And then, of course, it sweeps straight down. Now we fill in the bottom bit there. It's not easy. You know? Now, you can't tell me that you couldn't do that. Well, it might take you 10 minutes practice if you've never painted before. But I reckon now there's not a person watching me at the moment that couldn't do that. All you need is the paint and the brush, isn't it? Right. Now, what's next? Back to the painting again. Now, as you come nearer, the mountains get darker, you see them. So we've got to add in another colour to do that. What colour would you like? Well, I think we should put in some of this permanent rose. because rose and blue gives you a nice winey colour. And put some of that out. There he is. So you see we're working down the board, from the top to the bottom. Now let's mix some of the blue, some of the permanent rose, put the two together, take that hair out of the way. Don't worry, you won't end up with a baldy brush, I promise you. I'm going to put a little bit of raw sienna in there as well, because I want to get this a nice deep colour, look. Now, the second set of mountains come kind of like that. This is the foothills, how would you call them? I don't think there's enough of the brown in there. Always look at what you're painting from. Don't be afraid to look at it. I don't know, some people think, it's almost cheating if now we can just clear it off. Just clean the brush off a bit on that side there. Okay. Now remember, there's one thing about acrylic. They darken slightly. So make allowances for that. Watercolours lighten as they dry. Acrylics darken. Now I'm going to give the brush a little sweep in there. Put it there for a moment while I have a look at the painting again. Now, we notice that it's now beginning to go from kind of reddy colour into green. Do you see that? Now, how would you do that? Well, then, of course, you'll add in some yellow. Because what makes green? Blue and yellow. Now, you can do that if you haven't got the paints today. If you're not ready, I kind of jumped upon you and didn't notice it. I kind of, he's there, and I don't have any paints ready. By the next time, you can have the paints ready, and then you and I can paint along together. But if you have coloured pencils, crayons, I don't care what it is. I don't care what the medium is you have there. Try it anyway. Follow me along. It's great fun. Even with a pencil, a biro. Doesn't matter. Now, back to the painting now quickly again, and we see that we need yellowy colour. So let's make up some yellowy colour. Make yellowy with the blue. See that? Blue and yellow. And I'm using the middle-sized brush now because I'm just starting to put in some other colours there. See that? Now we want to put this has to be fairly bright there, see it? It's a kind of a dabbly colour as we brush stroke as we go across, see it? Now I think I'd like to give that a little bit of a dry because I'm going to go over this a little bit here. So why don't I do that? Brush just to show you. People say the acrylics dry too quickly. Not at all. Not for me. Just dry them. Okay, that's enough drying. Now you do not need a hairdryer for this, but I'm just proving the point that you can use one. There's one of the anti-things about acrylic paint. Acrylic paint's very new, by the way. It was only invented about 1950. I think somewhere in Germany. And people said, it dries too quickly, you haven't time to... Well, of course you can. You have pucks of time. But if you don't, if you're, what would I say, a true blue, dyed-in-the-wool oil painter, and you feel that acrylics are drying too quickly for you, well, then you can go along and you can buy some retarder. Did you know that? I'm mixing some of the blue and the permanent rose together now. Mix. See? That'll give me a little bit of light there. You can buy this retarder. It's called acrylic retarder. Clever name, he said. And then just put some of that with the paint and it'll slow up the process. So you'll have longer to paint. I often use the acrylic retarder if I was painting skies, complicated skies, and you want plenty of time. Now, I'm coming down all the time. Do you see me? I've almost come down now to the point on this painting, if you look at it, that I'm below the mountains and there's a good dark, before we come to this nice bright field, there's kind of a dark hedgeway or something. Let's put that in next. Still using the same brush. The beauty about acrylic painting as well, of course, is that because you can wash the brushes out with water, you do not have to have that many brushes. I mean, those of us who've painted in oils know you could end up with 20 brushes like a porcupine sticking out of every hand here, one here, because you need one for each colour. In this case, you don't. Just use the one brush and dry it off. Now, that's coming down there at a bit of an angle. You see that? So we need to... there we are now. Now, once again, for those of us who are beginning to paint, if this is your first picture, don't for goodness sake, worry if it's not exactly the same as the picture. Once that mountain looks near enough to Mount Washington, you're home and dry. You're there. Don't worry about it. You paint away. Now I'm putting in some blue and red again. See, I'm kind of mixing the colour. I don't want the thing to look as if it's just a flat colour, like it's a doorway or something I'm painting. I'm not painting a door. I mean, I often refer to painting a door, but I don't mean you should end up with looking like a door. You get the idea. Look, I'm coming down here now. Now I'm going to put that small brush, or middle-sized brush, back in there because I'm going at it with the big one now again. And now we're coming down to that nice light colour in the centre there. So I have some nice green made up there. Let's take a bit of the white over there. See that? Add a bit of the blue in it. We get a nice, even a bit of this tallow green. Here, that colour. Don't use too much now because it'll get. That's a little bit too much now. Once you put enough paint out, you're all right. We're inclined to not put enough paint out, and then we wonder why we're running out of it. Oh, look, I'm running out of paint. You've no paint there in the first place. Put out enough. It's reasonable. You'll get enough. You should get enough for, I don't know how many pictures out of one of these tubes, but quite a lot. And you certainly now won't be out of pocket if you sell one picture a year, you'll be ahead of the posse, as they say. Now I'm coming right down to the bottom. Just clean the brush off a little bit there, and then a little bit there, because we're going to darken that anyway. See, the whole thing is beginning to come together now. It's just nice. I'm mixing paint, by the way, as well, actually on the brush. Now, what I mean by that is this. Let's say I take some of the red, because there was a kind of a rosy colour to a lot of these. Now, put the two pieces on there with a little bit of the yellow. It's all mixed on the brush, right? And then watch when I put that on. See the way it... See? Because I've got some trees going up here, haven't I? This is the corner of the brush I'm going with now. And then the other side here. Oh, we're going left and right. So we're working our way down this thing. Now that seems to be fairly green over there, doesn't it? So we'll make up some green paint with the blue. And where's that yellow? There. Now. Let's see how does that look. Is that a bit... It was beginning to get a bit muddy looking. You can stop and you can dry your brush, clean it first. Don't never be afraid to do that. There we go, down there. We're just going to darken that bit down there a little bit. I don't like that colour, so I'm going to swish my brush around a bit. Now that leave it soaking there for a minute, it won't do it any harm. Take out the little fella, the middle-sized one. We haven't used the little fella yet, so. Now, again, it's some of the wine, some of the raw sienna. Look at that, that's a lovely winey colour. And that'll just go in there for some of those nice bushes and things. Dee-dee-dee. It's good and dark down the bottom here, see that? Now, let us, green and blue, how about that? Oh, there's a good deep colour, look at that, that's better now. Because as it gets nearer to you here, we'll put in the little tree stalks very shortly. I'll give that a bit of a swish around. This is what's known as painting in one go, alla prima. You ever hear of alla prima? In one go, one swish, not waiting. Now you can take a little more time than me, and what you can do is you can let it dry a little bit, or you can dry it, and it'll make it somewhat easier to paint. Oh, there we are. Because when you put the wet paint on top of other paint, you know what happens? The underneath paint gets picked up on the brush, and the whole thing changes to that colour. So I'm going to give that a bit of a dry now to help myself out. Are we ready with our paint? Okay, our patent Master Blaster. Now I think we've given that a real good dry, and what you'll notice with it is that as the paint dries, the moisture comes out of it, the water, and it goes a matte colour. It goes matte as against sheen on it. So then we're ready to get at it again. And you'll see the difference in how much easier it is. This is one of the wonderful advantages of acrylic paint, that because it dries, you can go over it and you won't pick up the paint, so you won't create mud. Let's look at the picture again. All right, so we have some nice red colour to go in there now. Let's, in the centre there. Look, now do you see the nice bright colour there? Look at it. See, we're not losing it in that, because we're not picking up the colour underneath. This is the beauty of acrylic. So it's great stuff. Actually, the whole hobby of painting, you know, is not that old. No. Up to about 200 or 300 years ago, painting was not a hobby. And in fact, even before that, all the artists were ever asked to do was paint a Nod portrait, and believe it or not, paint shields. You know, the shields that they used to wear in the suits of armour. That's what they used to paint. And they did some work for the church. But that was it. There was very little leisure painting going on then. We wouldn't have done too well in those days, because you're not supposed to. They weren't even supposed to enjoy themselves. It wasn't fun in those days. It is now, isn't it? Now there we go, and let's do a little bit in this corner here. See, we'll join up shortly here now, and then we'll be on the home run, won't we? Because we'll be putting in I don't want to cover that whole nice there. Now, in there with the brush again, and take out the other fella. Isn't it great? Now, I wonder what else I've got to tell you. One of the great tips I think I could give you about this acrylic paint, you heard me mention 8 colours. Well, stick with that. Don't go mad. Don't have dozens of different colours. 8 will do you. You know, they say that if you have just the 3 basic colours, the primary colours they call them, that you should be able, I'm putting in the tree here, and there's no tree stump yet, but we'll do it. Another one in there. Now, we're going to put the tree stumps in now, so what do we need? We need a small brush. So if you have those 3 colours, and with those 3 colours only, and we put out a little brown, it might help, you should be able to make any other colour. Red, blue, and yellow. But then, of course, it's much easier if you add in a few browns and things yourself. You don't have to mix them then. Now, let's see where we're going here. We have this big fella coming up the centre here, don't we? Yeah. Now, I'll tell you what I've got here. I've got a thing called Flow Improver. And I use this quite a bit when I get down to using this thinned out. I just stick my brush in it. You can buy it in any art store. Flow Improver. And what it'll do is, it'll let the paint flow that much easier. See? Not handy. I'll mix some of that with some of that. I'm going to make a good dark colour up here, because we need good dark. Now we have another. Where have we got another one? Oh, another one there, look. Another one there. See, the Flow Improver's the boy. And you just leave it in the bottle and stick the brush in. Believe it or not, it won't muddy it. You don't swish the brush around in it. Now, wash that off, because we've got something else to do now, haven't we? We got to get some white paint, because it wasn't all dark tree trunks. If you look at this side of it here, we got some real. These are beech. Is that what you call them? Beech trees? We put it into the retarder. Flow Improver, you silly boy. Now, let's see. We got another one running up here. Yeah. These are lovely, they're copper beets, what are they called? Seem to be loads of them around Mount Washington, loads of them. Now, there's another one over here, just to... Now we're nearly getting to the end of this thing. Now, don't do too much, don't fiddle around too much with it. Enough is enough. Yeah, I think we're nearly okay there. We'll put another couple of darkish colours on this, and we should be all right. Blue and brown mixed gives you a good dark colour. Make sure there's no white mixed up with it, or it'll get chalky. And into the Flow Improver. And then just Now I think we should give that brush, leave it in there, and bring out the big fella again. What do you think? Well, we've only one more thing or two more things to do with this, and we're nearly there, aren't we? Mix some of the nice yellow, bright yellow paint. And just look at that. Now, I think that's better, isn't it? Okay. All right, we must nearly be there, so put that back in. Now, I forgot this once in the last series, but I certainly won't forget it this time. And that is to put in my little birdie. Now, put that in there, and I'm going to try and show you something. Watch this. Look, if I pull off this, I have to do it very quickly. You can take your time at it. See that? And the last side here, which of course is always, you know Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law says if something is going to go wrong, it will. There we are, and there's our picture. And that's all I've got for this lesson. So until we meet again, you remember, try this out and have some more fun simply painting.
Simply Painting is underwritten by Winsor & Newton, makers of Cotman watercolors and paintbrushes, manufacturers of fine art materials since 1832. Frank Clark has written Simply Painting teaches anyone to paint in acrylics, a simple guide for all beginners. Also available as a video, Simply Painting, a beginner's guide to acrylics. The book is available for $19.95 and the video